Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist with me, your host Simon, as always. Welcome. Today, a bit of a different one for you. What actually got me into YouTube? You know, the first YouTube channel I ever did was called Top Tens, and it was a top 10 thing. Like, there was a time when I was definitely most famous for that. But that was a long time ago, and I think these days probably not so much. But this is what got me into it. Obviously a little bit of a different format now, but we're doing 5 of the weirdest murders that have never been explained. It's a bit of a throwback, except, you know, in a modern YouTube format of long form and podcasty. Let's jump in, shall we? Thank you to Kevin who wrote it. If you're new here, the format of the show, I've never read this before. Kevin has written it for me. We're going to explore it together, dear audience. Let us jump in. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. Brace yourself, baby, because I got a real long one for you. Jesus Christ, Kevin, are you trying to get me demonetized on YouTube in the first sentence, mate? Kevin! You'll seem to enjoy our previous look at 5 of the weirdest murders that have never been explained, so I'm back with 5 more cases that are even stranger than the last time. Oh, I see, because this episode is... Listen to this. That's how long today's episode is. It's extremely long. Unfortunately, I couldn't find more murders that were allegedly committed by the US government, so instead you'll have to settle for Trash Monsters, a 12-year-old mass murder suspect. Holy shit. Is that the Indian kid? I feel like there was some story in India of some kid who was a mass murderer. People are like, Simon, you made a 4-hour video on that like 3 months ago. Be like, please don't judge my memory. Just before we continue with today's episode, big thank you to today's sponsor, Vessi. Ooh. I'm wearing my Vessies. Normally, I have to say, I walk around the office just in my socks, because normally it's nice and warm. But we recently had the boiler replaced, and it's been a little bit chilly. I'm working on getting it right, so I've been wearing my Vessies inside, which is always nice. Vessies are a pleasure to wear, after all. Not going to be making use of their most incredible feature when I'm inside, though, and that's the fact that they are 100% waterproof, thanks to a magical material called Dymatex. It's not actually magical, it's just science, but... You can get these things completely wet, like up until the top here, like completely wet, waterproof, like Wellington boots. Plus, they slip on really quickly, they breathe well despite being waterproof, which is another bit of magic that I don't understand, but I have worn these rain and shine through summer, through winter, and my feet are always just somehow at the right temperature. These are the weekend sneakers, and when you get them, they are clean. Unlike my pair that I basically wear every day. But, you know, gives you an idea of the fact that I love this product so much. So look, your everyday sneakers are here. They're waterproof, they're comfy, they're stylish. It's the Vessi weekend. Hit up vessi.com/TCC. Put it back on. Or scan the QR code to get 15% off your first pair, backed by a 1-year warranty and a 30-day returns. That's vessi.com/TCC. And now back to today's video. Something akin to the Illuminati and satanic sacrificial rites. And just to remind you, Simon, since you were a bit disappointed when you made this realization last time, these are all unsolved cases, so there will be absolutely no closure. With that said, this is exactly the sort of thing that Kevin needs to explain to me, because Kevin overestimates that I'll read unsolved in the title, and then I'll be like, oh man, there's no resolution here at all. And Kevin now has to explain to me why. You know, might have a great memory, might have a giant brain, but let's go. With that said, it's time to buckle up and enjoy what can be best described as damn near 4 hours of true crime edging. Kevin. Jennifer Servo. On September the 28th, 2002, local NBC affiliate KRBC reported on the murder of one of their very own reporters, Jennifer Servo. She'd only been with the station for a few months, but her co-workers were still devastated by the news. After making the announcement, the broadcast then just cut to a candle and pictures of Jennifer for the next 22 minutes. Looking back on the broadcast 20 years later, the head of station expressed some amount of regret for this decision, which was a weird stance to take. He talked about the double standard, offering the rhetorical question of, why do we do that for our reporter if we didn't do it for anyone else? Wait, that's not, because they're your reporter. It'd be like, well, why didn't you go to Bob's funeral? It's like, I don't know Bob. Why'd you go to Kevin's funeral? Well, I just chose the name Kevin at random. Let's choose a different name because this is Kevin who wrote the script. But why'd you go to Dave's funeral? It's like, because Dave was my friend. I didn't know Bob. It's okay to memorialize people who are closer to you, but not others. And the answer to that is right there in the question, because she was your reporter. Exactly. I'm glad Kevin and I are on the same page about that one. I'd find it hard to believe that people had spent the last 20 years being critical of his decision and complaining to the station, but whatever. Is people really that dumb? Did I just say, is people really that dumb? Is Simon really that dumb? Yes. Are Simon really that dumb? Are Simon really that dumb? This story isn't about the sociopathic ramblings of a network executive, even if I did feel they were bizarre enough to at least mention. It's about a young woman whose promising career was cut short just after getting her first big break. Jennifer Olson was born on September the 3rd, 1979 in Columbia Falls, Montana. I have to say, there was this period of time. I know we're like a page in of a 4-hour episode and I'm already off on a ramble. There was this time in my career where things were really starting to take off. And I was like, oh, something is happening. And there was just this weird thought in my mind that it'd be really bad to die now. I was thinking, oh no, it's happening. It's happening. And now it's like many, many years later. I'm kind of like, if I died now, it'd be very sad. But I could say I'd had a good run. I could say I'd had a good run. Whereas 6-7 years ago, I felt or 8 years ago, when things were really popping off, I was like, oh, it would suck to die now. It would suck to die still, but it would suck different. The name Jennifer was chosen thanks to the song Jennifer Juniper by Scottish folk musicians Donovan, most famous for his songs Season of the Witch, Mellow Yellow, and Hurdy-Gurdy Man. And if you don't know any of those songs, don't worry about it, Simon. They were all hits like 20 years before you were born. Excellent, because I don't. As for the name Servo, that was her mother's maiden name, and Jennifer adopted it once her parents got divorced. I can't find exactly when that was, but based on other details, it was probably when she was in high school. All I know is that according to the reporting, she and her father didn't have much of a relationship during the last few years of her life. Anyway, Jennifer was a smart, ambitious, and above all else energetic child, and also a little bit weird, I suppose, or at the very least eager for attention. Okay. While other children spent their winters making snowmen, Jennifer was busy making snow mice, and while the other kids were content riding their bikes around the neighborhood, Jennifer would do so while wearing a full clown outfit just because. Vibes. I mean, yeah, why not? But if nothing else, these childhood antics demonstrate how much Jennifer loved being the center of attention in a way that would entertain and amuse others. Yeah, I get it. It's nice to be the center of attention. Is it? I don't know. We're not here to discuss this complicated thing. Jennifer was also clearly a woman of great culture, as she grew up loving both Super Mario Brothers and The Simpsons. Admittedly, the same could be said for most of us who grew up around that time, though The Simpsons in particular seemed to be a major influence on her life. Wait, how old was she again? 1979. Okay, so 9 years older than me. But also Simpsons and Super Mario Bros. Were, big part of my upbringing, childhood as well. Though The Simpsons in particular seemed to be a major influence on her life, Jennifer really identified with Lisa Simpson, the overachieving brainiac who was Springfield's answer to a question no one asked, and this wound up shaping a number of decisions she made throughout school. First was music. Jennifer initially started playing the flute in school, but switched to the baritone saxophone just to be like her cartoon idol. That instrument was all well and good for Lisa, since cartoons don't care about physics, but the fact that Jennifer could play this thing is pretty wild. When I switched from clarinet to tenor sax in junior high, I initially struggled to get any noise out of the thing because of how big it was. Barisax is monstrous by comparison, so she must have had remarkable lung capacity for her size in order to play it, especially the low notes. Of course, being physically active would certainly help improve her lungs, and Jennifer certainly was active. In high school, she was on the swim team, cross-country team, and was a cheerleader. She really is an overachiever, isn't she? And what's wrong with being an overachiever? I feel like that's got negative connotations, but it's like, wait, doesn't that just mean successful at And she was still able to get good grades in school, all while being active in athletics, music, and even working a couple of part-time jobs. Oh my god, you're making us all look like slobs. But as impressive as all of that was, high school doesn't last forever. Eventually everyone has to join the workforce or go off to college, and Jennifer was well aware of this inevitability. Not everyone, Kevin. Some people are just born rich and just lead a life of leisure. Or become criminals. She was also well aware that her family may not be able to afford college. Sure, there are scholarships, and it certainly sounds like she could have been deserving of one, but you don't find out if you've been offered a scholarship by a school until you've already applied and been accepted, which is f***ed up, America. I made a video on one of our channels, Into the Shadows, about how student loans in America are so f***ed up, and it's like, I had no idea how f***ed it was. I was like, well, I know it's sort of fucked. I got a mate who's like, yeah, no, I've still got student loans, and they're still charging me interest, like a lot. And I'm like, up. Student loans in the UK, I remember mine, it was like, I paid it back like, a decade after going. And it was like, I don't know, on the entire thing, there was a couple of grand of interest over like a decade of not paying off. Jennifer couldn't wait that long, so during Christmas break of her junior year of high school, she made a decision that her mother was not thrilled about. Jennifer's mother received a phone call from the United States Army Reserves because a 17-year-old daughter was trying to enlist. I didn't even realize that was an option, but apparently you can enlist at 17 instead of 18, so long as you have parental permission. Even though her mother wasn't a fan of Jennifer joining the army, it was hard to argue with a $14,000 toward college plus a $263 monthly stipend in exchange for just 38 days of her time per year after basic training. Yeah, that's pretty good. But they're also asking for you, and by asking, not asking, ordering you to go to war if there is a war. Which is, risky. I believe those were 1998 numbers anyway, although the tuition assistance has barely gone up since then. Since 1998. 1998 was the year I started secondary school, and it hasn't changed. I'm now middle-aged. That summer, Jennifer attended basic training, and the following year it was time to apply to schools. She loved writing and was good at it, so she knew she wanted to do something related to that. She applied to join the University of Montana's School of Journalism and was accepted, and on April the 19th, 1998, she decided exactly what she wanted to do for a career. Wait, why can't you just apply to college, get accepted, then get the scholarship? And if you don't get the scholarship, be like, yeah, I'm not coming. What you gonna do? Were they gonna force you to show up? On that date, The Simpsons episode Girly Edition premiered. In the episode, Lisa was chosen to be the anchor for kids' news program that would appear within the Krusty the Clown show. It was also the episode where Homer got the helper monkey mojo. That's not at all relevant to Jennifer's story, it was just a great episode, and after watching that episode, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She was going to become a news anchor, and not just any anchor, she was going to be the next Katie Koritz. I don't know who Katie Koritz is, but that's how the story goes, though admittedly I can't help but think it's slightly apocryphal. Not the part about her being the next Katie Koritz, as everyone who ever knew Jennifer quoted her as saying that, but the part that was directly inspired by Lisa Simpson. There are a lot of anecdotes about her being immensely fascinated by the news, and the timeline certainly makes it seem like Jennifer had already decided to major in journalism before the time the episode aired near the end of her senior year. Maybe she'd originally planned on writing the news rather than hosting it, but seeing her fictional role model as a TV anchor pushed her in that direction. While I'm not fully convinced about the veracity of this anecdote, it's a cute story, so I suppose it doesn't matter if it's a slight exaggeration. By all accounts, college was a great time for Jennifer, though it was also far busier than your average person could possibly handle. She obviously had a normal course load, and then there was the commitment to the Army Reserves as well. She was with the reserves for 6 years, where she both excelled and was well liked, eventually becoming the squad leader of her barracks in her senior year of college. Wait, so you just do 38 days a year? This seems like a really good deal. And then how much are they giving her? They pay for college? Or towards college? If $14,000 doesn't pay for college in 1998 America, what the f***? I went to college in 2005, and it was £1,000 a year. So what, $1,500 at the time? Or now? I don't even know. It was £1,000, whatever that was. I mentioned earlier that the Army Reserves are only 38 days per year, but I didn't actually break that down for Simon or our non-American listeners. I mean, I'm assuming it's like a bunch of weekends, right? Like we have the Territorial Army, right, in the UK, and it's there's a joke, they refer to it as the SAS, Saturdays and Sundays. As the billions of advertisements for the Army Reserve specify, it's just 1 weekend per month plus 2 full weeks per year. And during those 2 weeks, Jennifer had the opportunity to travel the world. And by opportunity, I mean obligation. Still, it did afford her to travel to places she would otherwise never been able to visit, which was one of the things she helped use to convince her mother to let her enlist in the first place. For example, Jennifer spent 2 weeks in El Salvador purifying water for the army, an experience that she documented in detail in one of her journals. From the way her mother described the journals, it sounds like Jennifer wrote down the day's events every day, not just when she was deployed to somewhere exotic. In the El Salvador journal, she described her insistence on going to spend some time at the beach, completely undeterred by the threat of armed terrorists that might have stood in her way. Yeah, is El Salvador still scary? There's the big crackdown, right? But in 98, it's probably quite scary, right? I know these things go in cycles. Presumably, the 2 weeks per year Jennifer had to serve were always during the summer, so as not to interfere with her class schedule. The rest of the year, she had her 4 jobs to keep her busy. Holy... The University of Montana is located in Missoula, and she worked at both KECI-TV and KPAX-TV, the city's 2 television stations. One was a CBS affiliate, and the other was an NBC affiliate, so I'd have thought there was some sort of conflict of interest there, but apparently not. I have no idea what these are. They're just networks. They're competitors, I guess. Chances are they were both unpaid internships anyway, as was the style at the time. Ooh, they pay for internships now? That's nice.
You guys are getting paid?
So there realistically wasn't anything to stop her from working at both. I can't say for certain whether or not that was the case, but it would explain why she also had a job cleaning hotel rooms to make some extra money. Oh my god, cleaning hotel rooms must be grim. Not my hotel rooms. I feel like I'll leave a hotel room in a good state, but I don't know. I feel like that's not going to be a particularly nice job.
Ah, I just touched that. It's like a mosaic of semen.
That's still only 3 jobs though, and her last one was probably the most important. Jennifer was an evening news anchor on KUFM, her university's radio station and the flagship channel of Montana Public Radio. Wait, the flagship channel of a state? Montana is a state. A state's public radio is a university radio station. Look, we had radio stations at the university, or like a radio station. Look, to be honest, it wasn't very good. Like, because it's a bunch of people who don't have a lot of experience. They're just seeing if they're good at it. Like, that's the flagship channel? All right. All of that is a lot, but somehow Jennifer still found time to have a social calendar. She wasn't out partying every night or anything, but she did spend a few years dating a man by the name of Dave Warren. Dave started working at KPAX around the same time that Jennifer did. Uh-oh. Dave, don't be the murderer. Okay? There was, oh wait, we don't know who the murderer was. That's the whole point of this. I already forgot, Kevin. It's good. Maybe you should just remind me at the top of every page or something. There isn't a lot of information, though he was the new meteorologist fresh out of college when she was a freshman in college. There isn't a lot of information about their relationship, but it sounds like it lasted for most of Jennifer's college career. There wasn't any horrible breakup or scandal or anything, and the two remained close friends afterward. On May the 18th, 2002, Jennifer graduated from the University of Montana with a major in journalism and a minor in communications, and like 3 people's worth of work experience already under her belt. She was ready to start her career as a TV reporter, but there was just one thing to take care of first. Her reserves, right? She's in the Army Reserves, which is gonna, that's gonna be tricky if you've got a regular-ass job. And you also probably don't need the money anymore, because you will have a job, like a big boy job, big girl job. When Jennifer enlisted, she had to go through basic training, there we go, but still hadn't done her infantry training yet. Normally this would have happened way earlier, but for people who join the reserves as high school juniors or seniors, it can be delayed until after college. It was an infantry training where she met a new man, Ralph Sepulveda. Some sources make it sound like Ralph was her commanding officer during training, though it's not exactly clear whether he had direct authority over her or was just a superior officer. I mean, either way, that's probably not okay, right? I don't imagine the army are like, oh, it's okay if you're a superior officer and you start dating literally someone who you can give orders to. Because even if they're not your direct report, right? If that guy's an officer or whatever, or above her, literally could order her to do I mean, not like bad things, like, but still, in terms of like workplace power dynamics, the military's very structured. What is clear, however, is that Ralph was 34 and Jennifer was 22. He He was also quite the departure from Dave, and not in a way that her family approved of. Though he was polite and charming, Ralph still came across to Jennifer's family as a bit of a bad boy, possibly because of all his visible tattoos. It was also the age difference, which I'm sure they weren't thrilled with. But just 2 weeks after they started dating, Jennifer got a big break, one that her family probably assumed was going to take Ralph out of the equation. Jennifer was offered a job as a full-time reporter on KRBC TV in Abilene, Texas. She was about to move a solid 1,500 miles away from Ralph. Oh wow, Montana to Texas is properly far, right? And go start the career of her dreams. Or so Jennifer's family thought. Even though the couple had just started dating, Ralph decided to quit his job in Montana and move down to Texas to be with Jennifer. Wait, you can't just... He decided to quit his job. Isn't he in the military? You can't just be like, I quit. Right? As a shameless romantic, I admit there is a world in which that's a really sweet and romantic gesture, and that's the world Jennifer thought she was living in since she was head over heels for Ralph. However, Ralph was hiding a dark secret. Okay, maybe not a dark secret, it's not like he killed someone, but it was still something pretty f***ed up to keep hidden from your girlfriends that you're about to move across the country with. He's married or something, isn't he? Oh no. He's got like a family or something. Like maybe they're divorced or whatever, or, in the process of getting divorced, but there's something he hasn't told her. On July the 16th, 2002, Jennifer and her mother began the long drive from Montana down to... They drove? 2 days later, they arrived in Abilene. Jennifer put down the deposit for a new apartment in the Hunters Ridge apartment complex. Now, there are a lot of different and somewhat conflicting descriptions of Abilene, Texas. Some places love to describe it as a small, sleepy town, while others note that it had a population of over 100,000. I don't think you got a sleepy town with a population of 100,000 people. Both of these descriptions are misleading, though. Abilene did have a large population, but it was also in a really big area, causing the population to be more spread out, just not spread out to the point of being a small rural community. Basically, the city was the equivalent of 4 Boston-area suburbs that were inexplicably stapled together into one city. It's rather odd, isn't it? But while it wasn't some quiet little town where everybody knew everybody else, Abilene really was a safe place to live, especially by Texas standards. Abilene's crime rate was well below the national average, even though the overall crime rate in Texas was well above the national average. That said, with a population of 100,000 people, bad stuff was still going to happen. There had been 3 murders in Abilene so far that year. I don't know if that's a lot, but it feels like a lot in a, decent-sized town. That June, murder also occurred in the Hunters Ridge apartment complex when Alan Brubaker got into an argument with his friend Russell Crowley. Wait, the apartment complex that she's literally about to move into? Wow. The argument ended with Alan taking a hammer to Russell's head, then riding his bike to Jennifer's new employer, KRBC TV, to confess what he'd done. I chose to believe the recent vacancy wasn't the same apartment she was living in now, but either way, coincidences like these can certainly make a city feel smaller than it is. I'm getting off track though, because Jennifer had only just arrived at her apartment and hadn't even started her job yet. She and her mother spent the next couple of days setting up her apartment, and on July 20th, 2 days after Jennifer and her mother had finished the drive, the true villain of the story appeared. Oh no, it's Ralph. Ralph Sepulveda pulled up to the apartment in a U-Haul. Well, how do we know if he's the true villain, Kevin? Can we know that? I thought this was unsolved. In a U-Haul-style rented truck, bringing not only clothes and furniture, but the dastardly Mr. Binks. Mr. Binks was Jennifer's beloved pet cat, and to this day, he has refused to show any remorse or take responsibility for his part as an accessory after the fact. Well, to this day, I'm going to assume he's very, very dead, because it's 27 years later and he's a cat. Anyway, the next day, Jennifer Kate became an aunt when her older sister Krista had her first child, though Jennifer would never get to meet her niece. She was devastated that she hadn't been able to be there for the birth, but the two talked on the phone that night and made plans to see each other at Christmas. The following day, Jennifer started her job as a reporter at KRBC. Things went really well. According to one of the news anchors, quote, "You could see early on that Jennifer had the tools it was going to take to move on to bigger and better things." Her career was off to a great start, and Jennifer was both excelling as an on-screen reporter and making friends with her co-workers as well. Do you just go straight to on-screen on something like that? You just go get a job, first job, and they're put you on TV? I thought you'd have to fetch people's coffee for years before they're like, okay, finally you could do sports. Local sports. You can do local weather. However, things in her personal life weren't going nearly as good. It turned out that impulsively moving in with some guy she'd only been dating for a couple of weeks wasn't her most well thought out idea, and the relationship was beginning to deteriorate. Jennifer confided in one of her co-workers that Ralph choked her during sex, which she very much did not care for. No, I'm not going to judge. If you want, you get up to whatever you want in your bedroom. But as long as it's consensual, dudes. Like, no. She's like, I don't like that. Then don't. Jesus Christ, Ralph. What the Now look, there's nothing wrong with rough sex, and choking someone during sex isn't an indication that a person is a violent murderer. That sort of thing requires consent, though. Thank you, Kevin. Agreed. There aren't a ton of details about what Jennifer told her friend, so I can't say whether she'd given consent but secretly hated it, but never said anything one way or the other, or explicitly said that she didn't want it, but Ralph did it anyway. Even if she didn't say it, there's going to be signs. She's not into it, Ralph. Stop. Realistically, Ralph should have been able to tell she did like it, regardless of what she said, but ultimately it didn't matter. God damn, Kevin and I, so often on the same page with really obvious... I mean, it mattered because consent is important and all that stuff, but it didn't matter insofar as Ralph's sexual desires hadn't yet been a deal breaker for Jennifer. If she was expressing her displeasure about it to a friend, then it likely would have become one, but it was never going to reach that point. In early to mid-August, just a few weeks after the couple moved in together, Jennifer discovered some secrets Ralph was hiding that absolutely were deal breakers. Jennifer and Ralph had met during her infantry training for the Army Reserves, but what he neglected to tell her before they started dating was that he already had a fiancé at the time. Told ya. I mean, I told you might be married or whatever, but, or on the verge of marriage from divorce, but also, here on the verge of marriage the other side. He also didn't bother mentioning that he had a child as well. Bruh. And to be fair, Ralph never saw his kids, so it probably wouldn't have affected their relationship anyway. No, but it would have affected the relationship because he's an absent father, which speaks to his character as a partner, doesn't it? After these revelations were brought to light and Jennifer found out what a Ralph was, she politely asked him to move out. Okay, it probably wasn't that polite, or at least it shouldn't have been, but either way, Ralph agreed and moved out. Good. Logically, you'd think that Ralph would just drive back to Montana, making sure to stop at the Hallmark store to pick up a "sorry I abandoned you and moved across the country with a younger woman" greeting card for his former fiancée. Maybe he felt he had burned too many bridges already, so there was nothing left for him in Montana, or maybe he really thought there was a chance he and Jennifer would get back together. No, dude. None of this is going to happen. Whatever he was thinking, he decided to get his own apartment in Abilene, one that coincidentally was close to Jennifer's apartment. That is very concerning. That is some concerning behavior. You could just be like, it's a coincidence, it's what was available, but I get the feeling there are going to be other little things that make it seem not like a coincidence, and actually the behavior of a psycho, allegedly. That probably sounded sarcastic, but I have no idea what the rental market was like in Abilene 23 years ago, so I can't say whether it was creepy or actually a coincidence. Ralph sure was intent on making it creepy though, or at the very least a bit pathetic, as he would occasionally drop by at her door crying and begging for her to take him back. Fortunately, this didn't take, and their relationship was well and truly over. Shortly after the initial breakup, Jennifer had a little bit of a fling with the 23-year-old KRBC weatherman, Brian Traverse. I thought everybody famously hated weathermen, but apparently Jennifer felt differently. Well, it's because we think they can't predict the weather, right? It's like, you told me it was gonna not rain and it's bloody raining, Brian, you dick. There are different accounts of how physical their relationship had gotten, with some saying they just made out a bit, while others said they'd had sex. What is this? High school? You're adults in a workplace. Chill. Either way, Jennifer got the impression that Brian wanted to let it lead to something more, like an actual relationship, but she had only intended it to be a one-time fling. Oh, poor Brian. Breaking his heart. That'll teach him. For getting the weather wrong. That dick. She wasn't ready for another relationship after the show that had just unfolded, and she needed time to focus on her burgeoning career. Brian appears to have taken this news better than I suspect the viewing public would have taken his incorrect weather predictions, and the two remained close but platonic friends. Jennifer focused on her work, continuing to impress those around her, as she spent the next 2 months trying to edge closer to her goal of being the next Katie Koritz. This was obviously still a long way off, but people started to seem to think that she had what it took. That brings us to the night of Sunday, September the 15th. Jennifer worked as an evening reporter, and her schedule was 10 hours each day. Thursday through Sunday, with Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday off. That's quite an, I don't know. Not having any weekend at all would be kind of rough. But 10-hour days, I'd much rather, if I had to do a 40-hour work week, I'd much rather do 4 10-hour days than 5 8-hour days. I'd probably rather do, 3 12-hour day, 12 and a bit hour days. No, 13-hour days. God, my maths is terrible. Never do public maths. Basically, I'd cram as much into days as possible and then have a long stretch off. That Sunday night, once the 10 p.m. news had finished airing, she left the station with Brian and headed to Walmart to do some late-night grocery shopping. They were caught on Walmart security cameras together at about 10:45 p.m. Afterwards, Jennifer drove Brian back to his apartment and she helped him bring in his groceries. He offered to walk her back to her car, but she said she was fine, so they just said goodnight and he went to bed. Brian was the last person to see Jennifer alive. Oh, it's not your fault, Brian, that you would have, I don't know, you'd have so many regrets about not walking her to the car, just not doing that one more insistence. No, I insist. Ah, it's not your fault, Brian. It's not your fault. Once she got home, she probably had dinner or something. Then at about 12:30 a.m., she called up Dave, her ex-boyfriend from Montana. They talked for about an hour, and according to Dave, it was a typical phone call, and Jennifer had seemed totally normal. The only thing that had seemed out of the ordinary that night was at around 3 a.m., when a neighbor later reported hearing some loud noises coming from Jennifer's apartment. The next day was the start of Jennifer's time off, so nobody thought it was too weird when she didn't answer her phone. Not at first, anyway. Her mother had called and received no answer, which was common, especially on the days she was working, but Jennifer always called her back as soon as she could. To go days without receiving a call back was a little more unusual. Yeah, but maybe she just forgot. Like, if I called, I don't know, my dad, I'd expect him to call me back. But if he didn't, I would assume that he'd just forgotten. On Tuesday, the station was understaffed, so Jennifer's boss called her to see if she could come to work. There was no answer, so he left a message. She was also supposed to meet up with some of her work friends that day, but never showed up. I don't know if they were supposed to pick her up or if they stopped by her apartment to check on her when she didn't show, but there was no answer at the door when they swung by. Her friends did notice something unusual, though. Jennifer's blinds were completely closed. It's not like she usually left them wide open so everybody could see her business, but she always left the blinds open just a little because Mr. Binks liked to jump up onto the sill and stare out of the window, just staring and plotting, as cats will want to do. Nice little bit of levity here in what I'm sure is going to be a horrible, mysterious mystery of where she's gone. On Wednesday, the station manager called her again to see if she could come in, but there was no answer. After the missed call, one of her friends relayed the information about Mr. Binks and the blinds to the boss, as well as their failed attempts to get a hold of her. So he decided to call the apartment complex and have them do a welfare check just to make sure that Jennifer was okay. She lived alone, so her boss was concerned that maybe she'd injured herself in a way that she couldn't get to her phone or something. This is, good for you. That's solid boss behavior right there. And it's like, you could just assume, she's not answering her phone because it's her day off and she doesn't want to come in or be hassled by me while she's in her free time, which is entirely reasonable and also good boss behavior. But the fact that you're like, I'm not really sure, this does seem out of character, and you phone up, this is excellent work, well done. As they waited to hear back from the apartment complex, the station's police scanner suddenly went off. The police were requesting support for a DOA at the Hunters Ridge apartment. Oh, God. Oh, my God. So the welfare the apartment manager goes to check on Jennifer, and then he's like, okay, well, I've got to call. He finds, I'm assuming, a dead body, and he's obviously first he calls the police rather than calling her boss back, and the boss finds out quicker from their bloody radio scanner. Oh, that's so. Oh, no. Everyone on the station who heard the police scanner immediately suspected the worst. Yeah, because what are the odds otherwise? It's her apartment building. And it didn't take long for their fears to be confirmed. Back at her apartment, Jennifer had been found dead on the bathroom floor. However, evidence suggested that her body had been moved there. There was a large amount of blood in the living room near Jennifer's bed. I know that sounds like a weird statement, but wait, why? Why is that a weird statement? So, assuming someone killed her, they stabbed her or whatever near the bed, and then dragged her body into the bathroom for whatever reason. It doesn't seem particularly weird. What am I missing? But she used the living room as her bedroom, and the bedroom as a walk-in closet. Body been moved, there's a large amount of... I don't get it. What am I missing? What's the problem here? This makes sense, as she undoubtedly needed lots of different outfits for work, and they couldn't just be shoved into drawers unless she wanted to spend half her life ironing. The apartment was also somewhere between 650 and 800 square feet total. Is that 50 square meters, 70 square meters? That's a very small apartment, even by European standards. So it's not like she had a crazy amount of space to work with in the first place. Anyway, there was blood trailing along the carpet from the bed, throughout the closet bedroom, and into the bathroom. It seemed very clear that she'd been killed in the living room, and then a large amount of blood in the living room near Jennifer's bed. Oh, a large amount of blood in the living room near Jennifer's bed. Okay, I get it. In my mind, I guess I just was like, oh, she's in like a studio apartment or whatever. I was like, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon in America either, is it? Just have an apartment, there's one room and a bathroom? And I know Kevin did point out there were two rooms, but in my mind, it was all just one big room. It seemed very clear that she'd been killed in the living room and then hidden in the bathroom. Jennifer had been bludgeoned and strangled, and there was bruising to her genital area. I've seen conflicting reports on whether she was sexually assaulted or if the bruising was the result of someone stepping there to hold her down while bludgeoning her. Some sources explicitly claim that she was not sexually assaulted, though coverage on KRBC has consistently stated that she was. I'm inclined to believe that the local news station, that was also her employer, has accurate information on this. By the time the body was found, rigor mortis had already passed and it was entering the early stages of decomposition. This, combined with everybody's inability to get a hold of Jennifer for days, led investigators to believe that she'd been murdered in the early hours on Monday, potentially around 3 a.m, when the neighbor heard noises coming from the apartment. Yeah, I mean, they could do this. I've seen enough CSI, right? They get that like meat thermometer thing and they stick it inside you, and then they see how hot you are to see how long you've been dead. Lovely stuff. Though the noises could have been the killer moving her body after death, so her exact time of death is unknown. Unfortunately, Jennifer not being discovered until over 48 hours after she was murdered was disastrous for the case. Back in 2002, it was a bad time to be a criminal. People were beginning to become more aware of DNA and other forensics, but there wasn't yet the deluge of true crime podcasts out there inadvertently instructing criminals on how to get away with murder. I'm so sorry. As a result, criminals were sloppier, leaving all sorts of trace evidence behind that could be used to identify them. That should have boded well for the case, were it not for the villainous Mr. Binks. Mr. Binks was in the apartment from the time Jennifer was murdered until police arrived on the scene. The detective on the case even said that the only 3 witnesses to the crime were Jennifer, the killer, and Mr. Binks, and that none of them were talking. Bro, did you really make that joke? Did you really make that joke? That's the sort of joke that Kevin can make 23 years later. Not immediately after the crime, dude. And you're a police officer. You're not a podcaster. Come on. Which, while accurate, was a weird and unhelpful statement for the police to make. Regardless, following Jennifer's murder, Mr. Binks spent the next 48 hours contaminating all of the crime scene evidence to the point that most of it was useless. DNA evidence was ruined. Any human hairs that may have been left behind were buried within and indistinguishable from the cat hairs that had been shed. It was a total and complete disaster. That's not to say, is this one of those ones that can be solved in the future, when DNA testing just becomes so infinitely cheap that they get that box of evidence, all the swept up hair from the apartment, they put it in a blender, they blend it all down, then they put it in a big machine, and they'd be like, get all of the DNA from there. And it's like, oh, 96% cat DNA, and there's this one hair from a dude, and he's the guy. Go find him. That's not to say there wasn't any evidence, but the things they found, and didn't find, were not nearly as useful as one might hope. To start, police did find fingerprints and DNA belonging to both Ralph and Brian, but that didn't actually mean anything. I've mentioned it before, but for as strong as DNA evidence is, it's still circumstantial. DNA can tell you with absolute certainty that someone was in a specific location, but it can't tell you when they were there or what they were doing. I mean, in some cases it can. Like, if you're extracting DNA from under someone's fingernails, then, I mean, defensive wounds, right? It can give you a clue. I mean, I guess it's not the DNA itself, but the location of where the DNA is found is telling you, well, that person was clawed at by that other person. And there was plenty of reason for their prints and DNA to be in the apartment. Most obviously, Ralph had lived there for weeks before Jennifer threw him out. Since I hadn't seen any evidence that Jennifer was an obsessive neat freak or germaphobe, it honestly probably would have been more suspicious if police hadn't found any of his DNA in the apartment. Yeah, that'd be super weird. I feel like you could go back to a place I lived in years ago, just look in the carpet, you'll find like something. It's not like we're having everything steam cleaned by crime scene cleaners after every, whenever someone moves out. As for Brian, she and Jennifer were friends. He had been to her apartment multiple times, so his fingerprints and DNA being there weren't inherently suspicious either. And beyond that evidence, for which there are simple explanations, there doesn't seem to be anything else that was left behind by the killer. There were a few things missing, however. Jennifer was wearing multiple gold rings, all of which were still on her fingers when she was found. But one of the rings was missing 2 of the stones. Stealing only the stones out of a ring, and not even all of them, would be suspiciously specific. But it's possible the ring broke during the struggle and the killer happened to pick the stones up, or maybe they fell out during the struggle and Mr. Binks ate them. Yeah, I'd say that's way more likely, just the gemstones fell out. Other missing items include Jennifer's cell phone, wallet, and car keys, none of which were particularly helpful. The killer didn't steal her car, none of the cards in her wallet were used, and her cell phone wasn't ever used again, at least not before switching out the SIM card. Very few phones had GPS back then, so it's not like they could have tracked the location of the phone until the SIM card was removed either. The stolen items that are generally regarded as being more important and useful were a Guess handbag featuring Anna Nicole Smith as Marilyn Monroe. Wait, what does that mean? A Guess handbag featuring Anna Nicole Smith as Marilyn Monroe. Wait, what? It's got a picture of Anna Nicole Smith. A handbag has a picture of Anna Nicole Smith as Marilyn Monroe. What is happening? Why would you buy that? Is that a real thing? 3 seasons of Sex and the City DVDs and a Saving Private Ryan DVD. What is happening? These are very different items. Sex and the City and Saving Private Ryan. Why? It's like, oh yeah, no, I'll watch either of those 2 things tonight. I feel like 2 things that are complete polar opposites. However, none of these items are nearly as useful as they're often portrayed. While the Guess handbag was certainly identifiable, it was hardly unique. It was a mass-market handbag, so unless Jennifer's bag had some rather specific and identifiable wear, it's unlikely that anyone could have determined it was actually her bag. As for the DVDs, those were an even bigger dead end. The comic book store I used to work at also sold CDs and DVDs, and the ones stolen from Jennifer's apartment are some of the most common overprinted DVDs imaginable. It wouldn't be uncommon for multiple people in the same day to try and sell those exact DVDs to us, so while it's always stated that the stolen items were never recovered, I'd argue that they were far too common for anyone to identify, even if they had been. That said, the stolen items largely feel like an afterthought, possibly someone's attempt to make this all look like a burglary gone wrong. Yeah, that's my vibe, right? It's just, I think the stones fell out of the ring, and then they nicked some random to make it look like a burglary, and I don't think they're particularly bright. So it's probably not the weather. Weathermen have to have a degree in meteorology, right? And I mean, I'm not saying that being bright makes you a better criminal, but I mean, it increases the odds of you being a better criminal. Jennifer's rings weren't stolen off her fingers and her watch had been left on the floor. Admittedly, those are more unique items that would be easier to trace back to Jennifer, but I can't imagine anyone breaking into an apartment at 2 a.m. just to steal some used DVDs that they can maybe get $20 for. Either it was an attempt to make this look like a burglary gone wrong, the killer had some personal attachment to those items, or they knew they had touched those items while in the apartment and wanted to remove their fingerprints. Right. The Sex and the City DVDs, of course. I'd wager it was the first one, though. Yep, me too, Kev. However, the most important thing missing from Jennifer's apartment, the most important piece of evidence, was the lack of any signs of a forced entry. Jennifer was known to be very safety conscious, and she always made sure everything was locked at night. Everyone that knew her also agreed she wouldn't open the door for a stranger. This means that either the killer was someone that was known to Jennifer and who she felt comfortable inviting into her apartment at 1:30, or it was someone who had a convincing cover story. Given the time of night, it would have needed to be a real good cover story, because it's not like the apartment complex is sending maintenance men or people to check the fire extinguishers at all hours of the night. Yeah. If it's a house in the middle of nowhere, then you could be like, oh no, my car broke down, or whatever, serial killers say. But when it's like a specific flat, it's like, what's the excuse? Could pretend to be a neighbor maybe, but I feel like you'd vaguely be aware of your neighbors. The bloodstains showed that Jennifer was killed between her bed and the kitchen, which was pretty much the opposite end of the apartment from the door, so it couldn't realistically have been a stranger who forced their way through the door. For Jennifer to have been that deep in her apartment, the killer had to be someone that she felt comfortable enough allowing into her apartment. I'm not going to say it's impossible that it was a stranger with a convincing cover story for why they should be allowed inside, but it is immeasurably more likely that Jennifer was murdered by someone that she knew. Yeah, because most people are murdered by someone that they knew anyway, right? That's most common murders, I think. It's not just random. I think it's someone she knew. I say it's a 90% chance. I got vibes that it's 90%. It's really, really likely. It's also likely that whoever this person was didn't come there with the intent to kill Jennifer. Although she was described as being bludgeoned, it doesn't seem that there was a weapon involved. Certain wounds indicate that she was alive while being strangled, and her killer may have forced her face into the floor or wall repeatedly while choking her from behind. Had this been premeditated, the killer most likely would have brought a weapon to make the murder faster and quieter. This is especially true if Jennifer was murdered by somebody who knew her, as they undoubtedly would have known she had army training and could attempt to defend herself. All right, she was off on those Saturdays and Sundays. We're really narrowing down the field here, because you're like, okay, well, we know it's a dude. We know it's someone she knows, and they know her. So we're really like, that's bringing down the pool from anybody to a smaller group, which is a great start. Whenever someone is killed, the immediate and most likely suspect is always the person's spouse or the person they're dating. Since Jennifer was single, that meant the most important people to look at would be her two ex-boyfriends and the guy who wished he was her boyfriend. First was Dave, the old boyfriend from Montana, who was the last person to speak to her before she was murdered. Seeing as he was 1,500 miles away, I think we'd safely rule him out as a suspect, which brings us to the two people who were actually in Abilene at the time of the murder. Brian was considered a person of interest, and he was the last known person to see Jennifer alive. He cooperated with the police as much as possible initially, though once his parents realized that he might be a suspect, they got him a lawyer. His parents? It's like, Brian, you're a meteorologist, you're a successful weatherman, you don't have a lawyer? Or like, at least a lawyer, you just call your own lawyer, mate. And that's fine, you should always have a lawyer, even if you're innocent. Yeah, totally. I believe Brian is still officially considered a person of interest, though the lead detective has stated that he doesn't think Brian is a suspect. That just leaves Ralph, who is the only person to ever officially be named as a suspect. After all, he had been known to drop by Jennifer's apartment unannounced, begging for her to take him back. That said, I haven't seen anything indicating that he did that at crazy hours of the night, nor that she ever let him inside the apartment when he came knocking. Also, Jennifer's friend stated that shortly before her death, she mentioned that Ralph hadn't come by in weeks. Given that everything in Abilene took place over the course of just 61 days, that means any visits he made to win her back must have all been within a single week or so. Maybe a week and a half, followed by a few weeks of leaving her alone. I'd like to think that would have meant it finally moved on, but I suppose we can't discount the possibility that maybe he showed up at Jennifer's apartment in a drunken mess, so she felt bad and invited him inside to make him some coffee and sober him up. That is exactly what I was thinking, Kevster. Or something along those lines that would explain her letting him in and being near the kitchen, though that is pure speculation. Pretty good speculation, though. If I was a police officer, I'd be like, let's explore that fairly heavily. So basically, there was nothing to work off. Most of the physical evidence that could have existed had been destroyed by Mr. Binks, and the two most likely suspects had identical alibis. But Ralph had exhibited some behavior that I would rather charitably describe as questionable. So pretty much everybody was convinced that he was Jennifer's killer. His actions following Jennifer's murder didn't help matters either. When talking with police, they said he came across as guarded, and that he didn't ask any questions about the investigation. I mean, to be fair, if I was talking to the police, I'd be guarded. Again, even if you're innocent, you'd just be like, okay, yep, guard up, because I'm talking to the police who are investigating a murder. Which, seeing as he knew he was a suspect, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Even if I was innocent, I'd probably be pretty careful and deliberate about my choice of words when being interviewed by the police. Right? Kevin and I, same page, as always. He also refused to take a polygraph test, but so what? I mean, fine, it was 2002, so I don't think people were fully aware back then that polygraphs are total and complete. But people discussing the case now should really stop bringing that up. Yeah. I'd probably refuse to take a polygraph test, even if I was innocent. I'd be like, well, I mean, now I know it's nonsense. So the odds of it saying that I'm lying are basically as good as the odds of it saying I'm telling the truth. So I'll be like, no, because I think they're nonsense and I don't want you to get the wrong idea. It was also seen as suspicious that Ralph didn't attend Jennifer's funeral. And on one hand, yeah, of course it is. They dated and he moved across the country to be with her, so obviously it's weird for him not to be at her funeral. On the other hand, everyone at the funeral thought he was her murderer, so maybe sitting it out makes sense. Okay, Kevin and I are absolutely on the same. I'm just like, yeah, because everyone thinks he did it. Of course he's not going to go. Just a couple of weeks after Jennifer's death, Ralph re-enlisted in the army and moved across the country, moving multiple times since then. Because he's in the military. It's not like he gets to choose where he goes. Again, this can certainly come across as suspicious. Oh, I'm sorry, the first move is suspicious, not the moving around. But it can also just be an instance of someone knowing where they aren't welcome and getting the hell out. Speaking of something else that could be seen as suspicious, though, there was something that Brian told the police. According to Brian, on the night Jennifer was killed, when they were running their errands at Walmart, she said she thought they were being followed, pointing out a car that appeared to be making the same turns as them. The thing is, though, Brian didn't tell police this when he was initially questioned. He only brought it up about a week later. That's kind of weird, right? Yes, it is, Kevin. Is it boring how Kevin and I are just so often on the same page? If you're with someone who thinks they're being followed, and then you find out they were murdered, that might come to mind as the single most important thing to tell the police, right? Maybe it slipped his mind when he was first questioned because he was in shock from what happened, but I do feel like that would be a pretty hard thing to forget. This would be one of those things that I doubt myself on. I'll be like, no. Like, a week goes by, right? And you had to mention it when you were interviewed by the police, and you don't know why. You'd be there and you'd be like, I don't know why I didn't mention that. And you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, I was in shock, right? I think over a week, I would have so much doubt because of that I'd be like, no, that's something that it's a false memory. I made that up after the fact, and I don't want to lead the police astray. I'm pretty sure that's like something that I made up in my mind. And then I'd go back and forth and I'd torture myself with it. And then I'd eventually be like, look, police, I'm not sure if this happened or not. I'm really doubting my own memory here, but I think this happened. And I don't want to tell you because I didn't want to lead you. Like something like that, right? I feel like that's not crazy. Does anyone else just doubt their memory as much as me? I'm like, his memory is so fallible. It also didn't help that Dave said Jennifer didn't say anything about being followed when they spoke on the phone, despite talking for about an hour. While part of me finds this to be the most suspicious detail of this case, the sudden shock of finding out your friend and co-worker was murdered, I'm sure, does a number on a person's mind. I always say not to put any weight on any behavior that seems weird immediately following a death, as everyone handles grief differently, so it would be unfair to put too much emphasis on Brian not bringing this up during his first police interview. And maybe Jennifer didn't mention it to Dave because at that point she was home safe and had since decided it was all in her head. Yeah, completely reasonable. I mean, we've probably all thought a car was following us at some point, only to then feel rather silly after it turned down a different road. It is, yeah, of course, because you've been driving, it's like, holy shit, this person's been following me for like 45 minutes down all these random roads. What are the odds? And then it's like they turn off and you're like, well, I guess those were the odds, right? Despite this being an open investigation for over 20 years, there doesn't seem to have been any progress made. Ralph has remained the only suspect ever publicly named, and very little new information has come out. In more recent years, police have said that they were following new leads and had sent some old evidence to private labs for DNA testing, but no new information has come out. That said, one of the few newer details I've found, stated by the lead detective, is that they do have information that they're not releasing to the public. Okay, it's not only normal but beneficial for police to hold that information, yes, so they can use the unreleased details to verify whether someone is telling the truth or not if they come forward with tips or a confession. Theoretically, this means that we might finally get an answer as to who murdered Jennifer, though with each passing year, at least some of those who were close to Jennifer become less convinced that her murder will ever be solved. Until we come up with that magical blending DNA machine. To date, the only two names that have come up are Brian and Ralph, and there isn't a good case against either of them, at least not based on what's public. While many people are convinced that Ralph killed Jennifer, including her entire family as far as I can tell, this does seem to be based entirely on vibes. Yeah, I'd say Ralph is the most likely killer of the bunch. I don't think Brian did it. But yeah, no, it's definitely not for sure. To be fair to them, I agree that in my opinion, Ralph is objectively a worse person than Brian, but that sort of analysis hardly qualifies as beyond a reasonable doubt. Yes, like, why do you think he's guilty? He seems like a bad dude. Brian seems cool, even though he's a weatherman. Hell, that wouldn't even count for a preponderance of the evidence. There's certainly evidence that Ralph is a liar, an arsehole, and needs someone to teach him about the importance of consent, but none of that is the same as being a murderer. There's not really a clear motive either, especially because he had apparently written to his ex back in Montana saying that he was over Jennifer and wanted to get back together. That didn't work out. Oh no. But at least there is some indication that he was potentially moving on and not obsessing about Jennifer. For now, all we can do is hope that whatever information the police are holding back and whatever leads they're following are enough to finally find justice for Jennifer and put her killer behind bars. Guys, wild that this person just got away with that. It's crazy. Whatever they have needs to be more than eyewitness testimony, though, because Mr. Binks took those secrets to his grave. Oh no, Mr. Binks, no! I mean, it's been 23 years and he's a cat. He's definitely dead. Keddie Cabin Murders. In July of 1979, oh wow, we literally, this is quite a coincidence, we just made an episode about this. Spoiler alert. In July of 1979, Glenna Susan Sharp, better known as Sue, decided it was time for some big life changes. She was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, but had been living in Connecticut with her husband, James. James was allegedly violent and abusive, so that summer Sue finally left him and traveled to Quincy, California to rent a small trailer that had previously belonged to her brother. Or maybe he still owned it, and he's the one she was renting it from. That part's not clear, but it doesn't really matter. Excellent. Moving on. What mattered was that Sue was away from her husband, close to some of her family, and she could start to build a new life for herself, and also for her 5 children who made the move with her. There was 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 12-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and 5-year-old Greg. That was an awful lot of people to be living in a small trailer. For the record, James did travel to Quincy to visit Sue once shortly after the move, but she must have made it clear that their relationship was over because he never returned. Anyway, in November, just a few months after moving to California, it was time for Sue and her children to move again. This time, it wouldn't be a move all the way across the country. It was just 10 miles down the road to the small community of Keddie. And when I say small, I mean extremely small. It wasn't so much a town as it was 28 cabins isolated in the woods, and cabin 28 had just opened up after someone moved out. Yeah, in the other episode, I was like, it seemed less like a village and more like a little holiday resort with some cabins and a bar and stuff like that where people would go on holiday, but people lived there. There were just 61 people living in Keddie, with Sue and her children making up 10% of the population. The cabin was much larger than the trailer they had been living in, but it was still small for a 6-person household. Sue shared a bathroom with her 2 daughters, while the young boys, Rick and Greg, used the other bedroom. Because John was the oldest, he got to live in his own room in the basement. Lucky John. Living it up. Yeah, I remember from the other episode, this cabin was really, really small. I grew up in a 6-person household, and we lived in a, relatively big house. And it was still it's a lot of people. These people lived in a 2-floor cabin. And by 2-floor, I mean there was a basement. There was only one entrance to the basement, which was outside the house. You don't really see that anymore, but in older houses, especially cabins or rural homes, this wasn't that uncommon, as the basement was just meant for storage rather than being intended for use as a living space. I'm sure John loved the privacy and isolation, especially if he ever wanted to bring girls over or smoke some weed or something. Yeah, that would have been awesome as a kid. Having your own entrance to your own little house or basement or whatever, that'd be sick. But there was a potentially meaningful consequence of this living arrangement. Sue never locked the door to her house. I mean, you're living in a community of 61 people, though. I don't think it's a super big concern, is it? Since John couldn't access the rest of the house from the basement, it was easier just to leave the door unlocked at all times rather than making somebody unlock the door and let him in every time he needed to take a piss. Why not just give him a key? Just give him a key! Besides, this was a tiny community of 60 people. That's the sort of place where I wouldn't expect people to lock their doors anyway, unless there was something specific that they knew to be afraid of. I mean, unless everyone's really shifty. It's like shifty Trevor down the street, always nicking. For the next 2 years, Sue mostly kept to herself, but that doesn't mean everybody else did. When you've got such a small community, people are going to talk, and many of them loved to talk about Sue. Her main source of income was $250 each month from the Navy. Sue hadn't served, but her husband had, which is probably why everything says that they were separated rather than divorced. It allowed her some small amount of money to keep her family alive. She was also on food stamps, and people who use any sort of social safety net in the United States tend to be looked down upon, hence all the talking about her. To try and increase her income, Sue began taking classes as part of California Education Training Act. I don't understand. Of course we have in the UK, some people would, and look down on people who are on, we'd call it benefits, but this is not the person. The person who's on benefits while they're getting an education to get a better job is the person who's trying to better themselves. That's who benefits is for, so they can have that until they manage to get a better job and any job and a better job and contribute to society. Bizarre to look down on someone like that. Someone who's just mooching off it and has no intention of working and just a leech on the state. Sure, look down on those people, in my opinion. And I just want to be absolutely clear, I'm not talking about people who can't work. I'm talking about people who just don't want to. It was a publicly funded program that provided skills training to people to make them more employable, as well as paying them a small stipend for their time. And by small, it was like $50 a week. Sue was taking a typing class, the sort of thing that would help her get an admin or secretarial job. And while taking that typing class, she also met Marty and Marilyn Smart. Though if Marty was actually smart, he'd been able to spell his own name correctly. It's got 2 T's. Anyway, the Smarts lived in the Keddy Resort as well. See, this is like a little resort, right? Just a couple of cabins away from Sue. They became friends, though it doesn't seem like the typing classes helped Sue in the job hunt. She was able to pick up a part-time job at the Quincy Elks Lodge, but the family was still poor. And so the rumors started. Some people suspected that Sue was engaging in sex work, while others believed that she was selling drugs. All right, you just making that up, or do you actually have something to support that? Or maybe both. At least one neighbor stated that she wouldn't let her child go over to Sue's house. The neighbor had no problem with their children being friends, and Sue's children were allowed over at her house, but she didn't want her kid going near their cabin because of all these sordid and unseemly things that might be going on there. To the best of my knowledge, there's no evidence that any of these rumors were true, but when has the truth ever got in the way of small-town gossip before? Indeed. On April the 11th, 1981, so like a year and a half after Sue and her family moved to Keddy, Sue drove into Quincy with the kids, Sheila and Greg. One of her other sons, Rick, had baseball tryouts that day, so at around 11:30 a.m. they drove into Quincy to pick Rick up. On the drive back, Sue noticed a pair of hitchhikers on the road. One of them was her oldest son, John, and the other was John's friend, Dana Wingate. She picked them up as well, and they all drove back to Keddy together. It'd be a bit weird if your mum just drove past and like, no hitchhikers today. Mom! I'm not actually sure why John and Dana were trying to hitchhike back to Keddy in the first place, though. Dana didn't live there. He lived in a foster home in Quincy, and just a couple of hours after arriving at the family's cabin, John and Dana hitchhiked back into town. Witnesses did see the boys doing random teenage boy stuff around Quincy, though, so we do know that's really where they went. These are just, like, adults moving around randomly, I'd look at way more suspiciously than teenage boys moving around randomly. Teenage boys just like, what should we do today? I'm bored. What should we do? Let's go here. For what? Don't know. Like, this is teenage life. It's just so strange how that doesn't happen as an adult. You're like, where shall I go? Yeah, I could go here. No reason. It just never happens. That night, Sheila, the older daughter, went next door to cabin 27 to spend the night with her friend, Alyssa Seabolt. Every Saturday night, Sheila and Tina would stay over at the Seabolt's cabin, but Alyssa, who was closer in age to Sheila, decided it should be the older girl sleeping over that night. Tina went to hang out and watch TV for a little bit, but she returned to the cabin, number 28, at 9:30 p.m. Justin Smart, the 12-year-old son of Marilyn and stepson of Martin, was staying over at the Sharp house that night. By the time Tina arrived home, Justin, Greg, and Rick were likely all in the boys' bedroom already. If not, they would have retired shortly afterwards. Sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., John and Dana hitchhiked from Quincy back to Keddy. The next morning at about 10 a.m., Sheila returned from the Seabolt's house. As she opened the door, she saw 3 dead bodies on the floor. Jesus Christ, that escalated quickly. And even I even know what's coming, and I'm like, oh yeah. They'd been so brutally murdered that from the brief glimpse she got of them, Sheila had no idea who the victims were. She ran back into the Seabolt's house and told Alyssa's parents that there were 3 dead people in her house. The Seabolts didn't have a phone, so Alyssa's mother, when was this? This is the 80s, right? Oh, late 70s, 79. Okay. Although we're talking about money, like $250 a month or $50 a week, like back in the 70s? That's not horrible, is it? I feel like that's got to be what, like a grand and a half, $250? Right? The Seabolts didn't have a phone, so Alyssa's mother went to see the owner of Keddy, because yes, this was all apparently owned by one person. Right, because it's a little holiday resort, right? While Alyssa and her father went back to the cabin. They went to the window outside the boys' room where Rick, Greg, and Justin slept soundly through the night and took them out of the cabin through the window. Sheila didn't want them to go through the door and discover the bloody mess inside the living room. Alyssa's father then entered the house through the back door to see if anybody was still alive. They were not, but his entry did potentially contaminate the crime scene. Realistically, though, that was the least of people's problems with how this was all handled. Once police arrived, the 3 murder victims were identified as Sue, John, and Dana. However, as one of the younger boys kept trying to tell the police, there was someone missing. Tina wasn't there. It's unclear whether the police didn't hear the boy's repeated statements or if they chose to ignore him, but Tina wasn't finally declared a missing person until hours after the investigation began. What? I remember this. She's young. That's up. To be fair, though, these were small-town cops. Not only was Kerry a tiny community, but it was part of the equally small Plumas County. Small in terms of population, anyway. The county's over 2,600 square miles. It's like, America's so big. You got so much space, America. But Plumas County has less than 20,000 people, with an average population density of less than 8 per square mile. That is so low. I got a friend who lives here in Prague, where I live, and he's from Montana. And I'm always saying, moving from the UK, which is densely populated, relatively to Czech Republic, I'm like, wow, you go in the countryside, it's there's no one there. You go to the UK and you're like, morning, hello, how are you? There's people. And here there's not. And he's like, dude, I feel here it's so busy. And I'm like, yeah, dude, you come from Montana, there's 4 people there. The majority of the police force had never seen a triple homicide before, so we can cut them a little slack for not being as cold and efficient as the FBI or something. They were likely in shock themselves. Don't forget, these murders were so brutal, Sheila hadn't even recognized her own mother and brother when she first walked into the cabin. All 3 victims were bound using medical tape and electrical cords, and Sue was naked from the waist down. Her underwear had been shoved in her mouth to gag her, and it was secured with more tape. She had also been struck with the butt of a Daisy BB rifle so hard that it left an imprint of the markings of the gun on the side of her head. This was the only way police were able to determine what weapon caused that injury, as the BB gun had been removed from the scene. Jesus Christ, to have that level of imprint? To be able to see that? Whew. John and Dana suffered blunt force trauma as well, but they were hit with hammers rather than the butt of a gun. In addition to the blunt force trauma, Sue had been stabbed in the throat with a steak knife, and John's throat was slit. There were 2 bloody steak knives found on the scene, one of which was bent 30 degrees. That suggests that a considerable amount of force was used to stab Sue, though the knife could have already been bent beforehand. Sue and John were both ruled to have died from a combination of blunt force trauma and stab wounds, but Dana died of asphyxiation. The killer strangled Dana to death with their bare hands. As for evidence on the scene, I like that Kevin's used with their bare hands instead of with his bare hands, because we don't know if it's a man or a woman. It's a man! It's a dude! A woman doesn't do this kind of... not exclusively. Of course, there have been horrible women killers, but I was going to say serial killers, but there's women serial killers? Yes, there are, just not very many. This was a dude. Just right off half the world's population. As for evidence on the scene, there were the 2 steak knives that were left behind and 1 hammer. It was suspected that there were at least 2 killers, both because there were multiple knives used and because it was deemed unlikely that a single person could brutally kill all 3 victims without getting injured. Those were the things the police found, but there were also the things they didn't find. There was the missing BB gun and presumably a missing hammer. Evidence seemed to indicate that there were 2 killers, each with their own knife, so it only made sense that each would have their own hammer as well. And if you don't think that necessarily means there would be 2 hammers, just hold on a minute until I get to the theorized sequence of events, as that will make it seem much more likely. Okay. More importantly, however, were the missing fingerprints. There were no fingerprints or useful footprints in the room where the murders took place, including on the weapons. This suggested that while the murders seemed personal based on the level of brutality, they were almost certainly premeditated by someone with at least a vague idea of how to cover their tracks. Or maybe by one person who knew how to cover their tracks and another who was a walking confession, but we'll get to that. Or, fingerprints and footprints, I suppose, yeah, it's harder to, you don't think about that as much. But fingerprints, they could just be wearing gloves, maybe it was cold outside. What season was it? I forget. I think it was winter, right? As far as I can ascertain, there was only 2 things missing from Cabin 28. One was a shoebox diorama that one of the kids made for school, and the other was Tina. I don't know if Tina was the one to make the diorama or if one of her siblings did, but regardless, she was infatuated with it, and now it was missing, along with the 12-year-old girl. There was also the matter of the electrical cords used to tie up Sue, John, and Dana. Those cords had all come from Tina's room. Based on that detail, Tina's disappearance and the missing shoebox, one of the police's earliest suspicions was that Tina was involved in the murders in some way. Wait, she's 12? That sounds ridiculous, and when I first heard one of the investigators say that suspicion fell on Tina, I thought it was ludicrous. Thinking about it more, though, it's not inconceivable that maybe she wanted to escape the house for some reason and sought help from an adult, or that someone had groomed her into helping them commit the crime. Oh, that's possible. Like, because 12, you'd be like, they probably can't do it themselves, but, 12-year-old who be manipulated into doing something like this. Not the murder itself, maybe letting someone in or opening a window or helping to cover up, something like that. It's good that they considered all possibilities, but it's even better that the police seem to have kept these suspicions to themselves at the time. When Tina was declared missing, the police said that the assumption was that she'd been kidnapped and was in danger, leaving out the bit about her being a potential accomplice. It's like, yeah, no, she's missing. Maybe she did it. People be like, guys, what the f***? She's 12. Now, before we get to the suspects and the small-town drama, let's first go over the sequence of events as they occurred. At around 1:15 a.m., the residents of Cabin 16 woke up to what they believed to be the sound of muffled screaming. Despite what you might suspect based on the numbers, Cabin 16 was one of the closest cabins to Cabin 28 where Sue and her family lived. None of the other nearby cabins heard anything, including Sheila and the Seabolts in Cabin 27, though some residents did note seeing an unfamiliar green van parked outside Sue's cabin at around 9 p.m. Anyway, the most important thing about all of this is that even if the muffled screams weren't enough to wake everyone, it was enough to wake up someone. It is believed that those screams came from Sue, and that the couple in Cabin 16 weren't the only ones to hear them. The theory is that John and Dana heard the attack taking place from the basement, and they ran into the house to protect Sue. It's a pretty good theory, I would say. Then they were overpowered and killed by the two armed assailants. Seeing as Sue had been partially disrobed and was being gagged with her panties, it's possible that John and Dana's intervention prevented a sexual assault from taking place, even if they weren't able to save her life or their own. Once the killers had finished with their victims, it's believed that they realized Tina had witnessed everything, or even if she didn't see everything, the electrical cords used to tie everyone up came from Sue and Tina's shared bedroom. She had to have seen the intruders and may have even been able to identify them. Once the murders were complete, they then kidnapped Tina so as not to leave any witnesses. This is the most likely account of how everything happened, though it still doesn't answer the who or the why. It also raises another question, specifically how Rick, Greg, and Justin were able to sleep through all of this. The screams were enough to wake up a couple who were 2 cabins away, so it seems suspicious that it wouldn't have woken up the children inside the cabin. It's obviously not to say it's impossible, though. As a notoriously heavy sleeper, I'm well aware that it's possible to sleep through some things that other people find surprising. Kevin and I, same page again. I sleep like a log. Like, I will have to have physical contact. Like someone will be like, to wake me up. I won't wake up if they just shout at me. If I can sleep through an earthquake in a motorcycle parade, I'm sure I can sleep through muffled screams coming from another room. That said, I did get woken up by an earthquake once, though. Although I sleep more deeply than I used to. I realized I was in Mexico City, and there was a big earthquake. And I just woke up I remember waking up in the night and being like, oh, what's that sound? I must be dreaming. And then I woke up in the morning, all my shit was on the floor, off the nightstand. And I was like, oh, there was a big earthquake. That said, for all 3 boys to be such heavy sleepers seems extraordinarily unlikely, and perhaps they weren't. Justin later claimed that he had seen something, and another time he said that he'd dreamed details of the murders. Eventually, Plumas County Sheriff Doug Thomas decided to have Justin placed under hypnosis to see if he can get some more reliable and complete testimony from him. All right, yes. Let's get some reliable testimony from him by hypnosis. That's usually where the description of that event stops, which would likely lead you to believe that Justin was hypnotized by a psychiatrist or some sort of other mental health professional who had lots of experience in this sort of thing. And sure, that would be a reasonable assumption. It's the one I made as well, at least until I saw an interview in which Sheriff Thomas explained that he'd been through 2 whole training sessions to learn how to hypnotize people and extract memories from them while under hypnosis. So that's basically as good as a trained professional. He also clarified that Justin was administered a polygraph afterwards in which he repeated the same claims from under hypnosis. To be fair, this was 1981, so I don't think people realized yet how lie detectors are. And hypnosis is also not reliable, right? Anyway, Justin gave descriptions of 2 intruders while under hypnosis. He described them both as being in their late 20s to early 30s, and both were wearing sunglasses with mirrored lenses and gold frames. You know, the stereotypical police sunglasses. One of the men was allegedly about 6 feet tall, dark blonde hair, and the other was allegedly 5'8" with black greased hair. Now here's where things gets weird, and I vaguely remember that this bit, he'd seen a TV show with two people who looked exactly like this or something, right? So he'd conflated the two things in his mind. Here's where things get weird, and some of the information becomes less reliable. This took place about 6 weeks into the investigation, at which point the Department of Justice and FBI had both gotten involved in the case. Mainly just the DOJ, though, as the FBI was really only there for the potential interstate crime of Tina's kidnapping, and they decided early on that the local police were doing a good enough job looking for Tina without them. Regardless, the description Justin gave was used to compile sketches of the two suspects, but Sheriff Thomas allegedly didn't use the forensic sketch artists at the DOJ's disposal. It's like, no, I've taken 2 training courses. I can do it. Give me a pen. Instead, he called in the services of one Harlan Embray. Most sources describe Harlan as some random guy, specifically describing him as a man with no artistic ability and no training at forensic sketching. First of all, that's just rude. The official sketches released weren't great, but as someone who actually has no artistic ability, I would kill to be able to draw this well. Take a look for yourself, Simon. Yet they are not good drawings, but they are very far from bad. I'm sure they'll be on the screen now, but you can imagine if you're listening to this as a show. They're just fairly weak sketches. But the shading and stuff is leagues better than anything I could do. These are not great sketches, primarily because both dudes look extremely generic by 1980 standards. Right, yes. It's quite specific to me, but this was in the 1980s. But I dispute the claim that the creator of this image had no artistic ability. This particular description seems to originate in an unsourced claim on Wikipedia, and it just made the rounds somehow. I mean, there's no artistic ability, just not much. But it is just opinion. However, Harlan wasn't just some random guy. He was a well-respected forensic sketch artist based out of the Reno Police Department, and he was so skilled that he was often lent out to other police departments to do sketches for them. In fact, it was probably the DOJ rather than Sheriff Thomas who called Harlan in to work on the case. Well, that changes things, because now if I'm looking at it, maybe this is exactly what a sketch is supposed to look like for the police. Is it artistically good? No. But maybe this is what they're supposed to look like. He was well known enough that his sketchbook containing about 100 images, including these 2 sketches, sold at auction for like $10,000. I mean, it's not Picasso, but it's not bad, is it? Chances are this revisionist history was created not to slander Harlan, but to cast suspicion on Sheriff Thomas. However, it also highlights how bizarre this case is and how conspiracy theories have only made the truth harder to find. Not that the conspiracy theories in this case couldn't possibly have some validity, but that's just no excuse to push misinformation to just create a more compelling narrative. Okay, rant over, let's get back to those sketches. There are a couple of ideas on who the people in the sketches could be, but the prime suspects in this case have always been Marty Smart and his buddy John Beau Babady. In fact, if you took the top half of the face from each sketch and put it on the bottom half from the other sketch, the result is said that it looks like the 2 men in question. Okay. That's obviously not how police sketches are supposed to work, but it's not like Harlan had great source material to work with. The sketches were based entirely on the testimony of Justin, given while under hypnosis by a barely trained professional. I've had 2 classes! But with Marty Smart named as a suspect, things began making sense. You may have forgotten this, because there are entirely too many names in this particular story, but Justin's full name was Justin Smart, the stepson of Marty. That immediately gives a possible explanation for why the 3 boys were unharmed, while everyone else in the cabin was murdered. There is also speculation that Justin may have specifically kept the 2 younger boys quiet in the room, and either forced them or coerced them to say that they slept through everything. While this certainly is possible, I personally believe the more likely scenario would be that Justin woke up, looked out of the room and saw what was happening, and then made sure Rick and Greg stayed in the room and pretended to sleep. The murders had some level of premeditation, but I don't think they were planned to the point of involving Justin as some others have claimed. Also, it would be insane to involve Justin. Isn't he 12 or something? How old is Justin? Like, you don't want to involve a kid, because they're just, they're not very good at keeping secrets. Especially big secrets like this. So, what was Marty and Beau's deal that people believed they could be capable of murder? Well, The two first met in Reno, Nevada, in the psychiatric unit of a VA hospital. Given that they met at a veterans hospital in the 70s, there's a reasonable chance that they both needed psychiatric help for stuff they saw go down in Vietnam. War is hell, as they say, but at the same time, being a combat veteran doesn't make someone a murderer. That may have been how the two met, but it was all the other alleged crimes that made people think they could be capable of cold-blooded murder. But also, if you do have PTSD and stuff, and you're in the psychiatric hospital because of something you saw in the war, I mean, that's definitely going to f*** you up pretty... You've definitely got a bit up, right? I'm not saying that makes you a murderer, but maybe increases the chances. Or in the case of Bo, that he was not only capable, but had already done it, repeatedly. Bo spent time in prison for armed robbery in Chicago, but it's believed his criminal activities went well beyond that. Holy, well beyond armed robbery? Armed robbery is one of the big ones. While there isn't any concrete evidence, people are convinced Bo worked for the Chicago mob. Most of his work wasn't in Chicago, though. Back in the good old days, Vegas used to be run by the mob, and while this sounds like a joke, if you can find people old enough to remember back then, they seem to unanimously agree that the city was much better when the mobs ran all the casinos. Unfortunately, all of these big corporate interests moved into Vegas and put all the family-owned hotels and casinos out of business, and that's as close to a pun as you're ever going to get from me. What's the fucking pun? Oh, I don't know what the pun is. Where's the pun? I can't find it. Where's the pun? I'll probably realize in about 30 minutes. Oh, giant brain. There was one downside to Vegas being run by the mob, though, which was all the people they killed. These days, if you get caught cheating a casino, they'll throw you out. But when the mob owned the casinos, they'd go bury you in the desert. And that was allegedly Bo's job, a mob hitman who buried people in the Las Vegas desert. I obviously can't confirm this for sure, but it is very much the prevailing opinion based on a good amount of circumstantial evidence. As for Marty, he worked at a restaurant as a cook, so just a little bit different than murder. But his wages as a cook weren't good enough to support his family, so he allegedly turned to selling drugs and manufacturing hashish to supplement his income. He was also fired from his job as a cook shortly before the murders on the basis that he wasn't very good at it. This left the alleged illicit drug sales as Marty's only source of revenue. Drugs weren't Marty's only alleged sordid endeavor either. He was also believed to be a bit of a slut, despite having his wife Marilyn back home. I do enjoy when a man is referred to as a slut, because we have this kind of what's it called? Gender difference, gender standards, gender something, where it's like a gender, you get, apply like a different gender standards. Thank you, Simon's big brain. We got there. Like, you'd generally be like, you know, historically or non-politically correct. A woman is a slut. A man is a player. I do enjoy it when it's just a man is a slut. And this is where we start to see a motive arise. Because Sue had escaped her own failed marriage, it is believed that she was counseling Marilyn on how to break things off with Marty. Not only was he allegedly sleeping around, he was allegedly abusive as well. This meddling into their marriage could have provided Marty with a motive to want to eliminate Sue. But things get way more complicated than that, as Sue was one of the people that Marty was believed to be sleeping with. Both Marty and Marilyn were described as being jealous and possessive, so Sue's purported interference could have been motive for both of the smarts. Marty wouldn't have wanted to lose control of his property, I mean his wife. Jesus Christ. So Sue talking to Marilyn about ending the marriage would have been unacceptable. That's some unacceptable behavior, Sue. I'm going to put you in the ground. My wife is mine. I own her, Sue. You slut. And Marilyn wouldn't have wanted Sue to be sleeping with her husband, potentially going to great lengths to break things off between them. That's already mildly complicated, isn't it just? But this is an extremely small town, so things had to get even more complicated. You see, Marty... How do you have so many characters in such a small town? You see, Marty wasn't the only one interested in Sue. I've already mentioned that there were rumors that Sue was quite sexually active. That slut. Oh my god, she got murdered. I'm so sorry. I got carried away with myself. I forgot she's the one who got murdered. I'm really sorry. I just got too into things after we called Marty a slut. But there was one man who definitely didn't sleep with her, which was Bo. This was emphatically not his choice, though. It said that Bo was very much interested in Sue, and that actually brings us to what Marty and Bo were up to on the night of the murder, which was weird. Thus far, I've only mentioned the 28 cabins in Keddy Resort, but there was also a hotel. The community was originally built in the early 1900s to house railroad workers and their families, and it was named Keddy after a local railroad surveyor. However, the isolated and scenic location actually started to attract enough tourists to justify building a hotel. Keddy's tourism days had long since ended by 1981, but the hotel was still operational, and like any good hotel, it had a fully stocked bar. How does a hotel stay operational if there's no one to stay in it? Right? It's kind of like some... what's that movie with Jack Nicklaus? The Stephen King one? The Shining. Some Shining right there. On the night of the murders, Marty and Bo went to the hotel bar wearing 3-piece suits and sunglasses, which was beyond strange. The cabins were low-income housing, with many of the residents, including Marty and Bo, being unemployed. This wasn't the kind of bar you walked into wearing a suit, unless you perhaps wanted to be very sure that witnesses would testify to your whereabouts. After drinking for a bit, Marty and Bo made a scene about getting angry that the bar switched from playing country music to playing rock. They returned to their cabin, but decided they wanted to go back and drink some more. According to Marilyn, Marty demanded that she go and invite Sue to come with them to the bar because Bo needed a partner. Sue! Marilyn said that Sue didn't drink, so she wouldn't be interested, but eventually they convinced her to go ask. Sue did indeed decline, at which point Marty and Bo went back for another drink. At some point during this, Marty also called the hotel to apologize for getting so angry about the music. Marty and Bo returned to the bar in their suits, and they said they left a little before 2 a.m. A little after 2 a.m., Marilyn woke up to discover Marty and Bo burning something that looked like clothes in the wood stove. Marty and Bo, could you be looking more suspicious right now? It sounds like you're trying to get away with a crime and you're doing all the right things, but you're being really dumb about it. Like securing an alibi by wearing a 3-piece suit, burning the evidence in the open. As the obvious suspects, Marty and Bo were interviewed by the DOJ. They were each given a polygraph test, and both of them allegedly passed. That doesn't mean anything, but it was information the police were working with at the time. Both men also left town immediately after being interviewed by authorities. They're like, holy shit, I can't believe I passed the test. Let's get the out of here before they arrest us. Which was viewed as highly suspicious, but just like with Ralph in the previous case, it does make sense. Even if I was innocent, I wouldn't want to stay in a town of only 60 people who all thought I was a murderer. Also, Marilyn threw Marty out and filed for divorce pretty much immediately after the murders. Now, I said that Marty passed the lie detector test, in which he denied involvement in the murders, but he did still give the police some interesting information for absolutely no reason. He mentioned that a hammer was missing from his toolbox, just a normal hammer with a blue rubber handle. That wasn't the hammer found at the murder scene, but as I said, it was believed there was a second hammer, one that Marty may have just given a description of. Why? What's going on? Many people view this unprompted volunteering of seemingly incriminating information as a confession on Marty's part. Why? I mean, I agree it's suspicious, but it's hardly a confession. That's okay, though. Marty was going to make as many confessions as he possibly could. Following his initial interview with the DOJ, Marty went to stay in Reno. About 2 weeks after arriving, he wrote a letter to Marilyn to proclaim his love for her and basically beg her to take him back. Most noticeably, though, in the letter he wrote, "I paid the price of your love, and now that I bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" I remember this from the original episode, and I think the conclusion was he's not admitting to murdering 4 people. He's saying that he lost his kids in the divorce or whatever. That sounds like a confession or possibly soap opera dialogue, but it was still not explicit enough. Fortunately, there was an even more explicit confession given to his therapist. When speaking to his therapist at the Reno VA hospital, Marty allegedly confessed to murdering Sue, though he claims not to have been involved with John and Diana's murders. He told his therapist that it was pretty easy to beat the polygraph, and that he and Sheriff Thomas were friends, such good friends, they had even lived together before. Is any of this true? Also, can the therapist say, isn't it more about, if someone is in immediate danger, then they can break the doctor-patient confidentiality? But my understanding was even if you say, oh yeah, I murdered someone, I need to talk about it. No one's in danger? That doesn't sound right, though. You shouldn't have murderers out and about. While both the statement from the therapist and the letter to Marilyn were given to the police, neither were treated as evidence. This has given rise to all sorts of conspiracies that there was a police cover-up to protect Marty since he and the sheriff were friends. There are also reports indicating that Marty may have either failed his polygraph or that the results were inconclusive. Again, polygraphs are but the police at the time believed in them, so if he was treated as having passed despite actually failing, that would certainly suggest that someone may have been helping to protect him. You gotta be real good friends to protect someone you think's murdered 3 people and kidnapped your little girl. Right? That means you're a mega piece of shit. I got some good friends, but if you murdered 3 people and kidnapped a child, mate, I'm sorry, dude, but no. That all said, I do question whether or not the information from the therapist would be usable without having been obtained by a court order. In general, confidentiality laws prevent therapists from divulging information about crimes to the police, okay? There are exceptions in the case of, cases of child abuse, elder abuse, or the abuse of a disabled person, or if a person is considered to be a danger to themselves or others. Well, that is very broad, because being a danger to others would literally cover elder abuse, child abuse, abuse of a disabled person, right? It could cover a lot. That seems very loosely worded. If you tell your therapist that you killed someone but don't have any intention of killing again, they're generally supposed to keep that to themselves. Maybe I'm missing something, and the exact rules are somewhat state-dependent, but I'm pretty sure this would have been the case in California at the time. Yeah, it does seem a bit strange that they divulged that, if they did. Of course, even if the information obtained wouldn't be admissible in court, the police still had it and could go investigate Marty further based on that knowledge. They didn't have to continue the investigation while pretending they'd never heard anything, they just had to find evidence that would be allowed in court. Unfortunately, the investigation didn't go anywhere. If the evidence was obtained after that illegal or not allowed bit of evidence retention, would that not also be not allowed? On April the 11th, 1984, someone was collecting bottles in the woods near Feather Falls, California, about 30 miles away from Keddie. Why are the bottles in the woods? What's going on? I don't know why they were doing this, since California wouldn't enact bottle deposits for... is it just trash? People just throwing bottles in the woods? People are for 2 more years, but that's not important. What's important was that this was the 3-year anniversary of the Keddie murders, and that random person in the woods found a human skull. Once news about the discovery broke, an anonymous man called up the Butte County Sheriff's Office, the county where the skull was found. The caller essentially identified the skull as belonging to Tina Sharp, even though police hadn't yet made this determination. They searched the scene again and found more human bones, including the mandible. Forensics was able to confirm in June that it was Tina's skull. As for the caller, they were never identified. The police had the original tape of the phone call and a copy was made as well, but they were never analysed or looked into to try and identify who placed the phone call. Both of those tapes have since gone missing. Years passed, and no progress was made. Marty and Bo remained the prime suspects, but they both escaped justice. Bo died in 1998 and Marty died in 2000. However, it is heavily speculated that there were more people involved in the murder, or at least in a cover-up. Sheriff Thomas comes up all the time as a potential conspirator, but why? Was his friendship with Marty really so strong that it let the man get away with murder? I can't believe so. There's so much against it. He's an officer of the law, but it's such a major crime that you'd be like, surely not. Unsurprisingly, there's more to this theory than them just being friends. It is alleged that the sheriff's department may have been involved in the drug trade, which would have made Marty and Sheriff Thomas not just friends, but members of the same criminal network. One of the sheriff's deputies, Mike Gamberg, stated that he knew there was a big drug house in Keddie. He claimed he knew which house it was and also who was running the drugs, but nothing seems to have ever come of this. Also, Mike was fired 2 weeks before the murders. He was able to get himself reinstated, but Sheriff Thomas forbid him from working on the case. There are 2 possible reasons for this. One was that it really was a conspiracy involved and Mike wasn't on the take, so he had to be kept away from the investigation. The other possibility was that Mike was too close to the crime, as he had known some of the victims and would thus lose his objectivity in investigating their murders. That would be a logical reason to disallow his involvement, but were that the case, then Sheriff Thomas would have had to ban himself from working on the case as well, thanks to his friendship with Marty. While there's no argument that the investigation was handled extremely poorly by the Sheriff's Department, who allegedly even excluded the DOJ and FBI from helping, there is a less malicious explanation for why it all happened. The prevailing opinion was that there was a big police conspiracy and cover-up, but some people have taken the stance that it was just run-of-the-mill incompetence. Rather than being a drug trafficker, it's been reported that Sheriff Thomas was just a small county sheriff trying to make a name for himself with this big case. Does seem to have worked, even though he did call in actually solving the case, as he got hired by the DOJ just a few months after the murder. But it doesn't explain the years of ignored evidence and leads that were never followed up on after the sheriff's departure. For decades after Tina's remains were discovered, there was no movement on the case. Everyone was positive that Marty and Bo were the killers, with the debate centered around who else was involved. Some believed Marilyn was involved in the murders because Sue allegedly slept with her husband. And then there was the big police conspiracy. And others even argue that Sheila was involved and had wanted to kill her own mother. Allegedly, a year earlier, when she was 14, Sheila gave birth to Jesus Christ, gave birth to a daughter of her own, but Sue made her give it up for adoption. There doesn't seem to be any confirmation that this birth or adoption ever happened, but those are the types of records that would likely be sealed, so it's hard to say. On the bright side, if that story is true, at least the father is claimed to be a similarly aged classmate of Sheila's, not an adult who was abusing her. Oh my god, I didn't even think of that. I'd say the list of people that have been alleged to be involved in the murder is endless, but basically it's just the 60 people in Keddie plus members of the Plumas County Sheriff's Department. And speaking of the Sheriff's Department, they have a new sheriff now. Greg Hagwood was only 16 years old when the murders took place, but he is now the county sheriff. He also brought in Mike as a special investigator to finally take a look at all the evidence that went ignored for so long. Most of the evidence pointed to Marty and Bo, and in 2016 a new discovery was made. Hidden deep in a local pond, someone found a hammer with a blue rubber handle. Oh. Based on the location, the hammer had clearly been hidden in the pond intentionally. It wouldn't have wound up there by accident. How is someone finding a hammer deep in a pond? What are you doing? Seeing as this hammer matched the description of the hammer Marty claimed went missing from his toolbox, plus his other confessions, that seems like the end of the case, right? With both suspects dead, there can't be a trial, but the rest of us can at least agree who the guilty parties were. Well, that's kind of what people thought when the hammer was discovered, but there was another piece of evidence. Even though the evidence from the murder had been filed away and ignored, it still existed. This meant that Mike was able to send off the tape that was used to bind the victims for DNA testing. And in 2018, he announced the results. According to Mike, DNA retrieved from the scene of the crime matched that of a known suspect, specifically a known living suspect. Whoa, so Marty and Bo, no, because they're dead. That suggests that even if Marty and Bo were the killers, there was at least one other person involved in what happened. Okay, right, sure. Someone who is still alive and could face justice. So who does the DNA belong to? Was it Marilyn, Sheriff Thomas, the 1991 Denver Broncos? We currently have no idea. Not the Denver Broncos. Love you, Broncos. Go Broncos. It's been 7 years since they announced matching the DNA to a suspect, but in all that time, it's never been publicly said whose DNA it was, nor have there been any further developments. Why? The current investigators do seem much more intent on solving this mystery than the ones back in 1981 did, though, so all we can do is hold out hope that we'll get an answer before every potential suspect has already died. Barry and Honey Sherman. Staging a home for sale can be really stressful and time-consuming. You have to clean everything, paint the rooms neutral colours, remove any family photos and religious iconography, and hide all of the pornographic sculptures that your partner keeps insisting are art. My parents. I don't know why, because my house isn't like this, but my parents love abstract nudes. So you just go to the house and there's nude pictures, not. It's all very artful and tasteful and stuff, but they just like that. Okay. Be able to piss and just a naked woman above the toilet. The goal for anyone viewing the property is to be able to imagine their own lives there, so seeing pictures from some random person's graduation or a copy of the Satanic Bible on a coffee table can really break the illusion. I hate stage times because I'm just I know. My wife, she loves it. She'll go in and she'll be like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'll be like, this place is objectively worse and more expensive than the last place. You just like it because it's dressed up fancy. And she's like, oh yeah, I guess. I still want this one. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake, it took them like half a day to paint these walls and hide the I just know I'm paying more for something I don't need. If your real estate is so inclined, you might even bake cookies before viewings of the house so that the scent of freshly baked foods can manipulate potential buyers by triggering a feeling of nostalgia. Yep, Ben Holmes is like, you're cooking cookies. It's like, I know why you're doing that. I'm not stupid. You're not just randomly baking on a Thursday afternoon. Real estate agent in someone else's house. Of course, the cookie trick probably works better in your standard 2-bedroom home than it does in a 12,000 square foot mansion with an asking price of $6.9 million. I don't know. I looked at some pretty expensive homes, and they still try that. It'll just be like you're in the kitchen and you smell it, and then in the rest of the home you don't. I still think people are really like tricked. Just because something's more expensive doesn't mean they don't fall for all the tricks. Like, I bet if you go to buy like a Ferrari, it's going to be $249,999 rather than $250, right? You're saving $1, but people are still like, ooh, $240. Still, a lot goes into prepping a house for sale, so you can imagine the frustration of real estate agent Elise Stern when she entered the home of Barry and Honey Sherman on December the 15th, 2017. When Elise entered the home, she found Barry's driving gloves BlackBerry. Oh, it's 2017. Did we 2017? Well, that wasn't that long ago. It's 8 years ago, Whistle Boy. People still had BlackBerries. I watched that BlackBerry movie recently. Really good. Worth a watch. I think it's just called BlackBerry. It's really nicely done. And some real estate documents scattered on the floor of the hallway, leading directly from the underground garage where Barry usually parked his car. While I certainly understand the appeal of walking through the door after a long day's work and immediately dumping everything you're carrying so you could go relax, it was pretty inconsiderate to leave this stuff strewn about when Elise was going to be showing the house to a potential buyer that day. Also, I'd just like to clarify that yes, this was 2017, and yes, Barry was still using an honest-to-God BlackBerry. Okay, so yeah. It was unusual to use a BlackBerry in 2017. People were using BlackBerries longer than 8 years ago. Okay, good. For the moment there, I thought I was going a bit mad. It's like 2017. It's only 8 years ago, right? To be fair to Barry about the mess, not the BlackBerry, he may not have actually known that Elise had set up an appointment for that day. She tried to call Barry and or Honey to let them know that a potential buyer wanted to take a look, but she had never heard back from them. The buyers seemed serious, though, and even had their own real estate agent, so Elise decided to set up the appointment without confirmation. Barry had recently installed a lockbox outside the house to store a spare key, so that Elise, contractors, and the Shermans' regular cleaning staff could all get inside even if Barry and Honey were both out. Since she could access the house, and may have had some potential buyers, it only made sense for Elise to set up the meeting without hearing back from the Shermans. After all, one potential buyer had already offered $5.9 million for the house. Oh, this is their house. It's a nice-ass house, holy shit. But Barry was insistent that it was worth at least $6.9 that he was asking. This house, holy shit, it just passed me. This house is 12,000 square foot. Even by American standards, that's enormous, right? Like, I feel like I live in a fairly large house. It ain't 12,000 square feet, I'll tell you that much. So he presumably would have been thrilled if Elise could have found a buyer to hit that number. Anyway, after tidying up the mess that Barry had left, this is just, I also thought like him just leaving a mess like strewn through the hallway as he comes in from work is just, I feel like that's not the behavior of someone who lives in a $6.9 million house. Like, you just put it on the side table that you've specifically had put there so you could dump your shit when you come home from work, right? Like, there's a little room when I enter the house. It's called a closet. Well, it's not a closet. It's like a dressing room, sort of. What's it called? It's a closet, but it's a room that you go in and your coats are in there and shit. There's literally a specific place where I just dump my shit when I get back from work, so it's not like littering the house. I feel like that's fairly normal, like, nice house behavior. As a side note, while I joked about the pornographic sculptures, there were a pair of rather questionable sculptures that Barry had left on display in the mansion while it was being shown for sale, sitting atop a pair of speakers in the den, where a pair of sculptures that, while not inappropriate, were still regarded to everyone as Barry as creepy as... Yeah, dude, also that's not going to be good for your speakers. I feel like that's going to affect the sound of your speakers. And those speakers are just sitting on the floor. Shouldn't they be on like a nice little mat so the sound like sounds better? Also, what the f*** up with your TV? This is 2017. Guys, are you living in like the 1990s? It's like a 4:3 aspect ratio CRT television. It's 2017, Barry. You live in a $6.9 million house. Buy a proper TV. The pieces were by American artist Leo Sewell. Oh, I'm looking at a photo, by the way. It's a printed out photo here. Leo grew up near a trash dump, and he loved building things out of stuff that he salvaged from the dump or found while walking in the woods. As an adult, he managed to turn this hobby into a career despite no formal training in art, with over 40 museums around the world showcasing his found object sculptures. Honestly, this does look like something. It kind of looks like my parents' living room. Like, all very modern, very tidy. I don't think my parents would buy a rug that fluffy. But those sculptures, the creepy-ass sculptures sitting on the speakers, exactly the sort of my parents would buy. I mean, it's not I'm sure it's lovely. It's, each to their own. But I'd find that extremely creepy, just hanging out in my living room. Just like, what's wrong with just a nice painting, guys? It's a neat backstory, but it doesn't change how unsettling it must have been for Barry's guests to watch TV on the couch, knowing that these trash golems were just feet away, watching them, waiting to strike. This probably isn't important though, so just enjoy the weird art. Once the potential buyers and their agent arrived at the Sherman mansion, Elise began showing them round. Things were going fine, I'm sure, but as the tour was coming to a close, it was time to show off the piece de resistance. That meant it was time to venture down into the basement. Wait, what? A $6.9 million house and the basement is the nice part? Well, I guess my basement's like, we have it's like a basement, but there's windows and stuff. So it's not really a basement. We just kind of, the front door is on it's complicated. But my basement is pretty nice. I did put a movie theater down there, which I guess, as a dude looking around a house, if I saw a movie theater, I'd be like, this one. My wife would be like, oh, but the last one had really nice beige walls and was tidy. And I'd be like, this one's got a movie theater, wife. Sure, there was the den with the weird monsters, but there was something far more special down there. The basement contained a 2-lane Olympic-length lap pool. F*** me, an Olympic-length pool. Isn't that 50 meters? Hey Siri, how long is an Olympic swimming pool? Siri! 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 Yo, Siri, how long's a Olympic swimming pool? 164 feet. What am I, American? Siri, what is that in meters? Oh, for sake, how can you be so when ChatGPT exists? What is 164 feet in meters? 50 meters. Now, that's pretty amazing. I did look at a house that had a swimming pool in, the basement. But it was not 50 meters. It was like a little piddly 15-meter pool. The room with the pool also had a retractable floor, allowing the area to be converted into a ballroom or space for other such events. That is dope, dude. I love that. When Elise entered the pool room, she saw Barry and Honey sitting next to the pool. They were in a weird position, like they were maybe doing yoga or something, and something about it made Elise really uneasy. She quickly escorted the guests, who seemed mildly freaked out as well, out of the room and told them that if they wanted to come back and look at the pool, she'd be happy to schedule another appointment with them. Elise is probably like rich people. What the f*** are they doing? Once the potential buyers and their agent were gone, all there was left to do was go and check on Barry and Honey and see what they were up to. Elise didn't want to check herself though, so she asked the housekeeper to go and look instead, but the housekeeper was having none of that. And rightfully so. If someone was like, hey, I just saw something that made me really uncomfortable, so I want you to go take a closer look for me, I'd tell them to right off. Yeah. I'd be like, Elise, you're not my boss. For the housekeeper, there was more to it than that, though. When she had arrived at the house that morning, she saw Honey's car parked in the driveway. It was snowing out, and there weren't any fresh tire tracks or footprints leading towards the house, so the housekeeper knew that Honey was home and hadn't left the house yet that day. I was just thinking, if you're having, a fancy-ass party in your, ballroom... What was if there's a floor? The smart home goes wrong and the floor just starts retracting and everyone's falling in the pool, all their drinks spilling everywhere, people drowning because they're in these fancy dresses. It's medieval times. So the housekeeper knew that Honey was home and hadn't left the house that day. Admittedly, I don't fully understand this conclusion because the Shermans had a heated driveway. The whole point of it is so awesome. Is so that there won't be any snow for somebody to leave tracks in, but maybe I'm just not rich enough to understand the finer details of such luxuries. Maybe it wasn't on. Could be. Dunno. Regardless, the housekeeper had been positive that Honey was home, yet she hadn't seen her at all that morning. What she did see, however, was Honey's iPhone. The phone had been on the floor of the bathroom, near the front of the house, right next to the toilet. The housekeeper immediately identified that as unusual because Honey never used that bathroom. It gave her a real bad feeling, though all she did at the time was pick up the phone and put it on the vanity and continue working. Based on these weird details, the housekeeper had zero interest in going to the pool to check on Barry and Honey. Fortunately for Elise, the gardener was willing to. She went down to the pool and then came back and confirmed that, yes, Barry and Honey were there. And yes, they were extremely dead. Elise quickly called Honey's sister to let her know, and then called the police. I'd probably call the police first, would be my first stop. And then I'd call a recruitment agency. While it's a little weird that the police weren't the first ones she called, it's hardly something I'd consider suspicious. Honey's sister had tried to reach her that morning, but was unable to, which is probably how Elise wound up with her phone number in the first place. So calling her wouldn't be the craziest thing. Plus, this was obviously about to be a major national news story, if not international news. Why? 2 rich people killed? I don't think that makes international news, does it? So Elise, wait, is this person famous? It's a very nice house, but there's plenty of just rich people who are not famous. Why would this be international news? What was their name? Barry and Honey? I don't know these people. Plus, this was obviously about to be a news story, so Elise may have wanted to make sure the family found out what happened before seeing it on TV. So, weird or not, there were still perfectly reasonable explanations for why the police weren't the first phone call. Oh, and if you're wondering why this might have been an international news story, Simon, Barry Sherman wasn't just some random CEO. Oh, I know. Some random nobody happened to be able to afford a multi-million-dollar house. He was the founder, owner, chairman, and CEO of Canada's largest generic pharmaceutical company, a company that made him a billionaire and the 12th richest person in Canada. Holy shit. I gotta say, dude, 6.9 million, you're a billionaire? Couldn't have got a nicer house, mate. Come on. 6.9 million? You peasant. All your other billionaire friends must laugh at you. That's why he's selling. 6.9 makes me look poor. Oh, and this guy's a good guy. Like, he's running a generic pharmaceutical company. That's the one that makes the affordable drugs. I mean, are there any billionaire good guys? I don't know. I'm skeptical. Just to be clear, because I personally misinterpreted that first line 20 times when I saw the statement, saying he owns a generic pharmaceutical company is not an editorial statement. Oh, he was just some generic pharma CEO. No, I know what it means. He makes generic drugs. The company specifically made generic versions of drugs. That was probably already clear to most of you from the start, but I just wanted to be very sure that no one made the same mistake I did. No one did, Kevin. No one did. Once the police arrived, it was time to investigate the bodies, but things started going poorly for the investigation before they even began. I'm thinking that I know this story now. I did hear about that Canadian CEO getting murdered in his house. That's why he's a billionaire. It's kind of news, isn't it, when one of them dies? Usually in a helicopter crash. Fucking billionaires and helicopters. If I was a billionaire, I'd be like, no helicopters. I've seen the news. That's how my sort go. Once the police arrived, it was time to investigate the bodies, but things started going poorly for the investigation before they even began. Police were shown the way to the pool room in the basement, but they didn't give specific instructions to any of the workers in the house. And since she hadn't been told to do otherwise, the housekeeper just kept on cleaning as normal, which isn't great, but it was going to get worse. We'll get to that, though. She was like, oh, well, there's a big blood stain in the study. I cleaned that right up, bleached the out of it. I'm a housekeeper, is what I do. The first thing the police noticed about Barry and Honey's bodies were the strange position they were found in. They were sitting near the edge of the pool, and their necks were tied to the metal railing by their belts. In the case of Barry, we know it was specifically a new belt he was wearing for the first time, though it's unknown if the woman's belt around Honey's neck was the one that she'd been wearing that day. Again, although the bodies were sitting on the floor, they weren't hanging from the belts. The belts were just merely used to prop them into a seated position and prevent them from falling back into the pool. This suggested they hadn't died by hanging, but rather they had been garroted using the belts. Despite this, Barry was still wearing his glasses as normal. Also, Honey's legs were straight out, while Barry's right leg was crossed over his left leg. That would have already been noteworthy on its own. Crossing his legs seemed to suggest that Barry had a very casual and relaxed attitude towards his own death by strangulation, whereas you'd probably think there'd be some amount of flailing around on his part. However, there was more to it than that. The positions they were found sitting in mimicked the positions of the 2 trash sculptures in the other room. Bro, that's really weird. Where the male figure had its right leg crossed over its left, it seemed as if the entire scene had been left staged after the fact. It's got some mob vibes, doesn't it? Like, what the You'd think, oh, they just got, it's a robbery. It's a big rich person's house. People go in and rob it, and the people die. But then you stage the bodies. No one does that. That's up. That's some, gangster shit. You're, sending a message. But to who? He's the head of the company. What message? Who are you sending a message to? Given this, it was no surprise that the deaths were officially declared to be suspicious. No However, it was a huge surprise when, just a few hours later, after the deaths were originally reported, anonymous sources within the police department told media that the deaths were believed to be a murder-suicide. The leak immediately became front-page news, and the reporting all over the country was that police believed Barry had murdered his wife before ending his own life. What? And then attached himself with a belt to a railing and crossed his legs with his glasses on. Like, what the f***? Okay, maybe it wasn't a complete surprise when this news leaked. In the original press conference, the police did mention that there were no signs of forced entry in the house, and that their investigation currently did not include a search for any suspects. To many people, that just meant that the police hadn't identified suspects or how they'd got inside, but I suppose some people may have already been suspecting that Barry was responsible. I mean, it's very worthwhile investigating the husband, but I mean, this doesn't seem like the first conclusion I'd jump to. Regardless, this was reckless and irresponsible on the part of whoever leaked the information, especially because the police weren't actually in agreement on what happened. But they were definitely considering the murder-suicide angle, as Honey had injuries to her face, whereas Barry did not. This detail suggested that she'd been assaulted before she was murdered, and it was theorized that Barry could have been the one to do this. Well, work out what those abrasions are. They caused by fists or a weapon or something, and if you can't find the weapon, look at Barry's fists. And have a look if they're all scuffed up from punching his wife. I'm going to say no, probably not, because otherwise that would have been brought up already. There was also the official autopsy, which contained an unusual bit of information. There is a horseshoe-shaped bone in the back of the neck between the jawbone and the third vertebrae called the hyoid bone. According to the autopsy, the hyoid bone wasn't broken on either Barry or Honey. This bone not being broken was considered a sign that a person hanged themselves rather than being the victim of a brutal strangulation. Oh, is that the bone that breaks, in the music? I started watching that TV show. It's quite an old one. The Americans, about these Russian sleeper agents in the US. It's so far so good. In the first episode, the guy's like choking some dudes, like he just like crushes his neck with his hand. I'm like, fucking hell, is that hyoid bone? That said, it wasn't enough for the coroner to make an official determination. While it was suggested that at the very least this wasn't a double homicide, there were some other details that made it less clear. Most notably, there were abrasions on the necks and wrists of both bodies, which would suggest that they had been restrained at some point. So, what do you do when you have some evidence pointing toward one theory and other evidence pointing towards another theory? You don't have evidence pointing towards another theory. You have the fact that her face was a bit bruised up, and that's it. That's not a suggestion that he murdered her. That's just speculation. Whereas the burn marks on the wrists are, that's actually evidence. It's like, oh, maybe it wasn't murder-suicide. How do you explain the burn marks on the dude's wrists? Dunno. Like, what the f***? You'd probably think the best course of action would be to collect more evidence. Well, yes, obviously. And if that's what you thought, then you probably aren't a member of the Toronto Police Department, because they absolutely did not do this. What is happening? The Sherman mansion continued as normal. Contractors kept painting rooms, housekeeper kept cleaning, and there were even reports that Elise brought more potential buyers to the house after the bodies had been found. Basically, any forensics that could have existed besides the bodies themselves were completely destroyed. Elise, you still chasing that tasty commission? What's the real estate's commission? I don't know. I don't know how it's done. Here, it's always on the seller's side. So I've never sold a house, so I don't know how much it is. It's like got to be 1 or 2%, right? So you're looking at like, how much was that? 6.9 million? What is that? You're looking at $70,000 to $140,000. She wants that commission, but the house is going to have to go through probate and all of that. It's really complicated. However, nobody close to Barry and Honey believed that this could have been a murder-suicide, least of all their children. The day after the news broke, they demanded that the police conduct a thorough investigation, and they hired their own private investigator to look into the case as well. Yeah, you're a billionaire. That private investigator, you could just be like, that can be whoever the f*** you want. You could probably get like, I don't know, some ex-crack FBI agent and be like, dude, come up here, pay you $500,000 a year. It's nothing to them. It's like, just and the police will be like out of their depth. They even hired Dr. David Chason, the former chief forensic pathologist for Ontario, to conduct a second autopsy. Yeah, like, I ain't a billionaire, but I've got like decent money. And if something like this happened to me, I'll be like, no, I'm just gonna hire people to look into this myself because, I don't know, I've done enough true crime to know that the police aren't always going to try that hard. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm just going to get a consultant who can tell me who I need to hire and what to do and all of that. and just make sure that it's a proper, thorough investigation, and that whoever did this gets prison time or the death penalty. It's Canada, they're not going to get that. But if it was my parents, I'd be like, go hunt them down. Go. This was a pretty big deal for a couple of reasons. First, Dr. Chason was obviously very well respected, since he'd served as the chief forensic pathologist until retirement. But more important to this case in particular, it was Dr. Chason's research into the hyoid bone. Years before this happened, he'd written a research. They found the dude. They're like, hey dude, you're the hyoid bone guy. You're the guy. I need you. Come over here. Gonna write you a big check. I had written a research paper looking into the topic, and his paper concluded that whether or not the hyoid bone was broken could not be used on its own to determine whether a person was murdered or took their own life. In his autopsy, Dr. Chason essentially said that even an idiot with no experience could have looked at the bodies and known that it was a double homicide. He was slightly more polite about it, but not much. It's also worth pointing out, as came up in my previous Casual Criminalist episode when talking about the death of the world's foremost Sherlock Holmes expert, people don't garrot themselves, even when using tools that pretty much never happens. Not only that, but nobody really believed Barry would have been capable of killing Honey. Sure, he theoretically could have had the stomach to commit murder, and maybe even had a reason to that we're unaware of, but he was 75 years old and in terrible shape. Honey was still 70, so it's not like she was that much younger, but she was in much better shape than Barry was. She worked out a lot, and she should have been more than strong enough to overpower Barry if he tried to attack her. I don't know, there is something to be said about just being big. If he's big, it's still going to be a struggle for his younger, more fit wife to overpower him, because I'm assuming out of shape means he's a little bit fat. Even if she was caught off guard and took a blow to the head or something, it's believed that the murders were committed elsewhere in the house and the bodies were then moved to the pool room. And it was believed that Barry simply wasn't strong enough to drag Honey's body that far. Also, we're talking about the CEO of a company, right? A billionaire. He's probably stepped on a few toes in his lifetime. Probably is currently stepping on, at the time of this stepping on toes. It's kind of, you're a big businessman. It's what you do. People are not going to like you. The Toronto Star published details of the second autopsy, as well as documents from the family's private investigator who agreed that this was murder. By this point, it was January, weeks after the deaths, and it wasn't until January the 26th, almost 6 weeks after Barry and Honey's bodies were found, that the police finally went on record to declare it was a double homicide. See, if this was just a regular person, not a billionaire who got killed, it would have just been ruled, the police don't know, it's probably a murder-suicide, moving on with our lives. But it's different for these people, isn't it? It's like 2 tiers. The police are like, okay, I guess we're going to have to do something because you got that fancy-ass doctor who definitely said it wasn't a double homicide, and he's the guy on the hyoid bone. However, they still had no information about suspects, at least none that they were willing to share. And for years, that's where the case stood. There was no forensics because the crime scene had been cleaned and contaminated and cleaned again repeatedly. No DNA or fingerprints were taken from people at the house when the bodies were discovered until 9 months later, and there was honestly just not that much to go on. And unlike in many other cases, the details that were missing weren't even particularly helpful. Take the fact that there were no signs of forced entry, for example. Usually that's an indication that the killer was someone known to the victims, someone who either had their own key to the house, or who the victims would have been comfortable inviting inside. In this case, however, we can't draw that conclusion. As it turns out, Barry wasn't particularly security conscious. On the one hand, you might think that heavy security wasn't necessary. This was Canada, not the United States, and the Shermans lived in an extremely nice neighborhood full of mansions. Yeah, but also people travel to nice neighborhoods to rob them. Maybe it was just a much safer and more friendly place up there than my American brethren and I would expect. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not particularly security conscious. I won't say the degree to which, but definitely been some lapses in security in my household. We're just guess we did leave the door open overnight. And not just unlocked, but open. In fact, in the year leading up to the murders, there were 160 break-ins in the neighborhood. Whoa. Okay. The Shermans' home had even been broken into before by burglars who came in through a skylight. If I was a billionaire living in a multi-million-dollar mansion in an area that was prone to burglary and had previously been hit before, I would absolutely have cameras everywhere. Yes. If I was a billionaire, I'd just have a security guard. It's nothing to you. The amount of wealth is just inconceivable to a regular person. You just have a guy or 3 guys who do 8 hours each or whatever. You would always have. Why wouldn't you? But Barry did not, and he wasn't alone. Pretty much nobody in the neighborhood had CCTV cameras. Oh, I guess what's stopping him as well is like everyone else in the neighborhood's also living in giant-ass houses, and I guess no one else has a security guard, so it'd be weird if you got a security guard, but also you're the 12th richest person in the country, dude. There was only a single camera on the Shermans' property. He wasn't filming any of the entrances to the house. Ironically, the lone CCTV camera in the mansion was in the pool room where the bodies were found, but there was no footage from that day. Not because the killer had stolen or erased the tapes, but because the camera hadn't been turned on in years. The fact that they know that is interesting, because then they must know that it's not working. The camera had been installed back when Barry and Honey's children were younger, so that the parents could watch them when they were in the pool. Basically, it was just a billionaire version of a baby monitor. Once the children were old enough that their swimming skills would no longer have been called into question, there was no need to ever turn the camera on. But the lax attitude towards security went beyond just a lack of cameras. At the time of the murders, the back door to the house was unlocked, because it was always unlocked. Anybody who was aware of this could have easily entered the home without needing to break in. I feel like this is an inside job a little bit. Like the camera's never on, the back door's unlocked. I feel like someone, and a lot of people must come and go in this house, like housekeepers, cleaning staff, gardeners, all the various staff that rich people have. Like someone talked, right? Or let slip. And if somebody wasn't aware of this, well, they could have entered the house through the giant window that was left wide open. This wasn't an everyday thing like the unlocked back door, as the window was only left open to air out a recently painted room. But if the killer wasn't well enough acquainted with Barry and Honey to know that they left a door unlocked, this avenue for entering the home would have been far more obvious. Yeah, but he did know them. And he did know what's up, because he staged their bodies like the sculptures. It's definitely someone they know. There's a motivation here beyond just straight-up robbery. While this opened the possibility for the murders to have been the result of a burglary gone wrong, it was deemed extremely unlikely. Yeah, because it is. Nothing was stolen from the house. I'll say that, is there? Which would be extremely unusual if the killers had originally intended to rob the place. It's like, no, they intended to go in and nick a TV, their CRT TV, but then they ended up murdering them and then staging the bodies as sculptures from the living room. Bro. To be fair, we've definitely talked before about how if you intend to commit burglary and ends in murder, absolutely don't take anything. Obviously, don't commit burglary or murder in the first place, but from a hypothetical standpoint, I mean. If you rob someone's home and something you steal gets traced back to you, chances are you're spending a few months or years in prison. But if you murder someone while robbing their home and something you stole gets traced back to you, you could get life behind bars or even the death penalty. In America, anyway. That said, there is still an exception to that rule. Cash. Except under extremely specific and unlikely circumstances, there's effectively a 0% chance that any cash stolen could be traced back to the murder. Yet when investigators arrived at the home, Honey's wallet contained $7,500 in cash! Hell! What is your life? How do you even fit $7,500 in cash in a wallet? That's like a proper stack! If this had indeed been a burglary, there's basically no chance that money would have still been there. Under normal... Who the carries around $7,500? I don't even carry around cash. I don't think I've got any cash on me, because I just pay for everything by card. Under normal circumstances, you could argue that maybe the killer freaked out after committing the murders and left without checking her wallet, but whoever killed them took the time to pose the bodies in a very deliberate fashion. It's beyond unlikely that someone would intend to rob the house, murder them instead, take the time to move and pose the bodies, but then not bother looking in their wallets for cash. I think it's absurd that we're still considering the idea of burglary. Besides, the fact that the bodies were posed at all speaks to the murders being targeted, if not personal. It really seems like someone was trying to send a message, and while the initial thought might be that it had to have been someone who'd been in their house before, seeing as they were posed just like the creepy trash sculptures, remember that the pool and the room with the sculptures were both in the basement. It's possible they were targeted by a stranger who then saw the sculptures in the basement and was inspired to replicate them with the dead bodies. Now, as I said, there is effectively no forensic evidence in this case, which is mostly blamed on police incompetence. That said, we can still put together a rough timeline of what happened based on the location of the items in the house. On December the 13th, 2 days before the bodies were found, Barry and Honey began their day as normal. At 8:30 a.m., a personal trainer came over to spend an hour with Barry, followed by a 2-hour session with Honey. Before heading off to work, Barry popped into Honey's... Oh, he's 75 and still working. He likes his job. Barry popped into Honey's workout to show off the new belt he was wearing for the first time. A belt he'd purchased off a discount rack in a tire store. I do enjoy that. Because the tire stores in Canada apparently also sell belts for some reason. Also, why would you be in a tire store, billionaire? And why are you buying a belt in a tire store? I mean, I respect it, shit, but it's kind of weird. Oh yes, I'm not sure whether it's relevant to their murders, but Barry and to a lesser extent Honey were also extraordinarily thrifty to the point of being miserly. Bro, they lived in a $6.9 million house. No one miserly is heating an Olympic swimming pool in Canadian winter. At least when it came to spending money on themselves. The couple were known for philanthropy and were rather generous towards others, but they spent very little on themselves. For example, despite having $7,500 in cash in it, Honey's wallet was so old and beat to shit that it was held together by rubber bands. That cash was also assumed to be intended for the staff as holiday bonuses. Honey didn't typically walk around with large sums of money like that. Anyway, after a workout followed by a 2-hour massage, Honey, holy shit, spending 4 hours. Honey left to the house to do some shopping. It was the second day of Hanukkah, so she had to pick up some gifts. At around 5 p.m., Honey met Barry at his office. Barry had spent the rest of the day doing regular CEO stuff, but at 5 they had a meeting scheduled with the builders of their new $30 million mansion. I told you it was too small! Now that's a billionaire's house right there. To go over the plans. The meeting lasted about an hour, at which point Honey drove home. You want to be moving house at 75? You've already got a really nice ass house, dude. I mean, I don't know, maybe, but it seems a bit odd. Throughout the entire day, everyone saw that Barry and Honey thought they seemed completely normal and happy, furthering the belief that this couldn't have been a murder-suicide. At 6:21, on her drive home, Honey used her cell phone to call one of her friends. Her friend's husband had just had surgery, so Honey was calling to check in and see how he was doing. It's very thoughtful. It was around 8 p.m. when Honey arrived home, where it is believed the killer was already waiting inside. She went inside and placed her bags down in the kitchen. Police photos show that she had neatly put her bags of gifts on the kitchen table, and her purse was on one of the chairs, so she must have had the time to at least start to get settled before being ambushed, though her phone winding up on the floor of the bathroom near the entrance to the house suggests that it wasn't very long. At 8:23, Barry sent a routine business email from his computer at work before driving home. Barry he's 75, he's still working at 8:30. I mean, I respect that. That's you like what you do. Because you don't have to, he's rich already. He doesn't have to work if he doesn't want to. He got home around 9 p.m. and entered the house carrying his driving gloves, BlackBerry, and the aforementioned real estate papers. It's believed that he was attacked as soon as he entered the house from the driveway. Given the amount of time between the two murders and how long the killer had to be inside the house, it's pretty safe to say that this was targeted. Not that I think anybody was on the fence about it at this point. The proposed series of events also lines up with the coroner's determination that they'd been dead for about 36 hours before the bodies were discovered. Now all of this leaves the question of who could have done such a thing. Barry wasn't great at socializing, so Honey usually handled that for them. But she was nice and well-liked, and the couple donated somewhere between $100 and $300 million to charity over the course of their lives. God damn. And they were generous when it came to friends and co-workers, with Barry reportedly helping employees who were struggling financially. So, who could possibly want them dead? As it turns out, the answer to that is a whole lot of people. Yeah, I mean, you've risen to the top, dude. You step on some toes, as I said. Like a meaningful percentage of the Canadian population wanted Barry dead. Oh, okay. He makes generic drugs, though. To address the most obvious suspect first, there is no credible evidence that Luigi Mangione, the guy who shot that pharmaceutical CEO in New York, was inside Canada at the time of the murders. Admittedly, Barry owned a pharmaceutical company, not a health insurance company. Oh, yeah, it was health insurance, sorry. But it's not like pharma execs are any more popular than health insurance execs. And among all the pharma execs, Barry was seen as the absolute worst in all of Canada. Oh, Canadians pay more for generic drugs than people in most other countries, even the United States. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Prices in Canada are 20 to 50% higher for generic drugs than in other countries, something that isn't lost on the people of Canada, and many believe that these high costs were single-handedly caused by Barry Sherman, an accusation that was not without merit. University of Ottawa law professor Amir Attaran published a comparison of domestic versus overseas pricing by Barry's company, showing that they were deliberately overcharging Canadians for access to drugs. Well, why didn't someone just start importing drugs into Canada then? They're generic. How hard can it be? Amir referred to Barry as a deplorable human being and said that, quote, he sought to manipulate our system to enrich himself and impoverish Canadian patients who used his drugs. Wow. Okay, so it went from, I was like, Barry's the good guy. He's making the generic drugs so people with, terrible diseases can get cured, treated without spending a ton on branded drugs. And no. No. Sorry. So that's already motive for any Canadian citizen that bought generic drugs. I'll just buy my drugs online. I'll just be like, where can I... and people will be like, you can't import that. And I'll be like, we'll see about that. Barry wasn't just greedy. He was a vicious businessman. He could have had as many as 100 different lawsuits filed at any given time, mostly patent suits trying to get the government to compel drug companies to let him make generic versions of their drugs. I mean, that is what he does. His brutal, litigious, and potentially illegal business practices made him a lot of powerful enemies. I say potentially illegal because he was never convicted in Canada, though he did pay over $50 million to the United States to make allegations about price fixing go away, and a number of drugs were banned for import by the United States because of substandard manufacturing practices. Alright, Barry is quickly turning into not the best of dudes. I was like, this guy seems good. He seems like one of the good billionaires. Oh dear. There was also a pretty sensational lawsuit after Barry's death that accused his company of using sexpionage to illegally steal trade secrets from Teva Pharmaceuticals, a case that I believe is still ongoing. Wait, is this where... It's pretty sensational as Barry's death accusing a company of sexpionage. Is this where... Like, I was telling you about the Americans program, and they use sex to basically extract information from important people. Or is it like a blackmail thing? Maybe it's both. But yeah, it's probably not exactly business ethics 101, is it? So yes, it wasn't just the plebs that hated Barry. Other pharmaceutical executives hated him as well. I think they're more motivated to kill him. I think they are, especially in this manner. This is a professional job, in my opinion. Like a professional hit. And those cost a lot of money to kill a billionaire, I bet. In fact, he has even told his family and friends multiple times that he was surprised he hadn't been murdered by a business rival yet. He even said that it would cost only $1,000 to hire somebody to kill him. That's it. Barry did always tell his family that these comments were jokes, just like how your boyfriend always claimed it was a joke whenever he brought up the idea of a threesome. While Barry's business enemies were a smaller list of potential suspects than anyone in Canada who is unhappy with the price of generic drugs, these high-powered executives were potentially a more credible threat to his life, but it was still just a vague cohort of people who would have been happier if Barry was dead. There was no specific name tied to any of these potential motives for his murder. To date, there has actually never been a suspect named in Barry and Honey's deaths, but there was one name that received far more attention than most. A man who not only wanted Barry dead, but who, by his own admission, even had a plan to murder him. And that man was Barry's cousin, Kerry Winter. Alright, that's a curveball. Barry had been a gifted and ambitious student growing up. It started college at the University of Toronto at the age of 16. Where he studied engineering science. After graduating, he went to MIT, where he earned his PhD in astrophysics. I feel like if you're choosing like a big brain PhD, astrophysics is probably up there with like neuroscience, right? It's like rocket science. So what the fuck does this have to do with the pharmaceutical industry? I don't think it's got anything to do with it. It's just, he was really intelligent, and he applied his intelligence to something else. Instead of being a rocket scientist, he decided to be a ruthless businessman. Absolutely nothing. But when it came to getting into the pharmaceutical game, Barry had something even more important than relevant qualifications. He had nepotism. Oh my god, even this. Okay, so he is extremely intelligent. He is absolutely ruthless, and he is starting from a place ahead of everyone else. No wonder he's rich and successful. I mean, his uncle, Lewis Lloyd Winter, was the founder of Empire Laboratories, Canada's largest wholly owned pharmaceutical company. That's just not some Nepo baby shit. That's like some Prince Harry Nepo baby. Barry often worked at the lab during the summer, mostly just driving a truck around to collect pregnancy tests. But whenever Lewis had to travel, he would have Barry watch over the operation. There undoubtedly would have been somebody at the company more qualified to do this, but it did give Barry the knowledge and experience that he needed to run a pharmaceutical company. Can you imagine being the 17-year-old driving a truck around collecting pregnancy tests or whatever? And it's like, oh no, my dad's Lewis Lloyd Winter. Yeah, like the owner. Everyone would be like, oh, you're not going to be driving trucks forever, are you, mate? What are you up to this autumn? I'm off to MIT to do my PhD in astrophysics. I don't know if this is like, I'd just be like, nah, I'm just from the neighborhood. Just a regular dude. Definitely not the nephew or whatever, or the son of his uncle, Lewis Lloyd Winter. Lewis Lloyd Winter is also the most rich person's name I've ever heard. That would come handy in 1967, shortly after Barry completed his PhD, when tragedy struck. Lewis died suddenly of an aneurysm at the age of 41. And 17 days later, his wife Beverly died of leukemia at the age of 31. Fucking hell. They have kids? 4 children. All under the age of 7. Jesus Christ. That's horrible. They were left as orphans. The children were obviously incapable of carrying on the family business at that age, so Barry saw this as an opportunity. He negotiated a deal with the executor of his uncle's estate to purchase Empire Laboratories. However, there was a catch. In order to agree to the sale, the estate required that Barry pay 15 years' worth of royalties on the company's 4 patented products to the 4 orphan children. The kids would also each be allowed to purchase 5% of the company when they turned 21. Alright, it seems pretty fair, to be honest. That sounds like... otherwise everyone's just screwed. On the surface, this seems like a pretty fair deal. But there's a brother, isn't there? He's going to have a son who's just less competent than Bazza. The company stayed in the family. Lewis's children would continue to receive money from the company, and once they were old enough, they'd each have the opportunity to purchase a part of the company back from their cousin. Just selling the company off in its entirety to the highest bidder would have provided a much larger lump sum for the Winters children, but this seemed to provide the best long-term outcome for them. Yeah, I like it, to be honest. Or at least it would have, if Barry wasn't a creature of pure greed and evil. Barry, what have you done? Are you going to screw these 4 children out of this? You, Barry. Rip. Because there was a catch to the catch. The Winters estate wouldn't sell the company to Barry unless he agreed to those stipulations, but the stipulations would also be voided if he sold his stake in Empire. He's going to sell it and start up his own company, isn't he? It's probably called, Empire 2. So 2 years later, he did exactly that in a manner of speaking. Rather than simply selling the company, Barry initiated a share swap with the company's largest customer. Basically, he traded his shares of Empire for an equal value of shares in the US company, Barr Laboratories. While technically Barry had sold the company, realistically this was more of a merger with Barry still very much involved. A few years later, Barry and Barr Laboratories sold off Empire, thus ensuring that the contract with Winters estate was fully nullified. Dude, that is some hardcore piece of shit move right there. Not that Barry had been paying any of the royalties he was supposed to in the years leading up to it anyway. What the f***? A year later, Barry founded his very own pharmaceutical company, Apotex, staffed entirely with former personnel from Empire. Dude, you should have just called it Empire 2. Just lean into being the incredible douchebag that you seem to be, allegedly. This may have all been legal, but it was still shady and douchey as f***. Not that the children had any idea what was going on. Kerry had only been 4 years old when his parents died, and it had been just 7 years since then. Fast forward nearly 10 more years, and suddenly Kerry's older brother, Dana, told him that their long-lost current Barry wanted to meet them. Dana knew that Barry had effectively inherited their father's company and was really wealthy, but Kerry knew nothing about any of this. They also didn't really know what this meeting was about, as none of the Winters children had seen Barry since becoming orphaned. Their lives had also been entirely downhill since then. Dude, you stole inheritance off 4 orphaned children. This is like the douchiest thing I've ever heard in my life. When Dana and Kerry met with Barry, they were both crack addicts. Barry told them that they had to cut the shit and make something of their lives, and he was going to help them. He asked Kerry what he wanted to do with his life, and Kerry said that he wanted to do renovations. And so that was it. Barry agreed to rent a property and bankroll a renovation business for Kerry. At the time, it probably seemed like a much-needed lifeline. All he had to do was get himself clean, which he did, and this wealthy cousin, who he had no recollection of a meeting before, was going to give him a chance at a life running his own business, doing exactly what he wanted to do. In a vacuum, this seemed like an incredible act of kindness, but eventually, Kerry and his siblings found out the truth of their estate's deal with Barry. Oh my god, I know I'm sure this is legally airtight, but man, I'd be lawyering the up. Not only had Barry not paid them the royalties he agreed to, but he sold the company to void the contract, then founded a new company doing the same thing using the same staff. That part was technically legal, but it was utter and his cousins knew it. So they sued him for $1 billion, 20% of the value of Apotex. Which seems fair, arguing that they were supposed to own 20% of the company according to the agreement Barry had made with their executor. This turned into a long court battle with Barry emerging victorious. Yeah, because he's like not stupid. He's very intelligent. He would have made sure this is legally airtight. Not only did the judge rule against the cousins, referring to their argument as wishful thinking, but he ordered them to pay $300,000 to Barry to cover his legal fees. Yeah, and Barry had an amazing lawyer, I bet. But throughout the entire ordeal, none of the cousins were more vocal of their hatred for Barry than Kerry was. Like I said, not only did Kerry want Barry dead, but he had a plan for how he'd do it. It wasn't a good plan, nothing he'd get away with, but I don't think he cared because it was about sending a message. Kerry wanted to decapitate Barry in the Apotex parking lot. It sounds like he was willing to compromise with the exact method of execution, but he was very insistent that Barry should be killed either in the parking lot or within the Apotex offices. Murdering Barry and Honey in their home simply wouldn't have quelled his hatred. However, Kerry was also the one person who seemed to disagree that this had to be a double homicide. He claims that when he first got the phone call that Barry and Honey were dead, his reaction wasn't one of sadness or disbelief. Well, it definitely wouldn't be one of sadness. He hates them. All he said was something like, "So he finally did it." This, he claimed, was because Barry had previously contracted Kerry to murder Honey for him, though Barry called off the hit after Kerry set it up before the deed was done. Provide some evidence. To be clear, there is no evidence that this happened beyond Kerry's word, but he was very confident about this really having happened, so much so that he even took a lie detector test. Yeah, but people know that lie detector tests by this point in history. To prove that he was telling the truth about Barry hiring him to kill Honey. This was done for the Canadian TV show The Fifth Estate on CBC television, and honestly it's worth watching because of how weird and uncomfortable it is, I bet. As we know, and I've already mentioned this episode, polygraphs are total and complete. They are no better at determining if someone is lying than guessing or just flipping a coin. Well, aren't they like 1% better? Isn't it like 51-49 accuracy or something insane like that? However, Kerry believed that they worked, which was what was important here. He told you he believed that they worked, but it's the 20... You could have just Googled that. You can watch for yourself and make your own determination, but I honestly think that Kerry believed what he was saying. That doesn't mean any of it really happens, and it could have been some sort of delusion, but he really seemed to believe it. Oh, I think it's complete. Why would the dude you hate and who hates you want you to take out a hit? He could just be like, yo, that dude who I hate just tried to hire me to do an assassination of his wife. Go put him in prison. And when the person administering the polygraph told Kerry that he failed, he appeared to be genuinely shocked. What followed was effectively a man being gaslit into changing his story as he struggled to understand how the machine said he lied when he was sure that he was telling the truth. Kerry tried to figure out what he could be misremembering or maybe exaggerating to explain why the machine said what it did, while also being fed suggestions by the person giving the test. The police then made a big deal about Kerry changing his story, despite the fact that they were effectively forcing him to change his story after telling him that the polygraph called him a liar. Or he knows it's a lie and it's all a big set-up con. I don't know. It's not like you're not playing 3D chess exactly here, are you? 4D chess? It was really messed up, and I think this is the perfect showcase of why polygraphs should not only be not admissible in court. They're admissible in court? Or not only be not admissible in court, but shouldn't be used at all? Yeah, well, obviously not. It feels like you can see Kerry losing his grip on reality in real time. Oh, come on. I do believe he could be acting. Even without seeing this, I think people just act this to reconcile what he genuinely believed with what he was being told the polygraph said, but maybe he's just a really good actor and I was totally fooled. So check it out for yourself if you like, after finishing this video, of course. Again, though, while it is my opinion that Kerry absolutely believed what he was saying, I'm not suggesting that it was actually true. Even though he's reportedly been sober since 2012, crack can cause long-term psychological effects, including delusions that can persist even after a person stops using. I'm also pretty sure he stopped crack long before that and was sober from everything by 2012, but that part is less clear, so don't quote me on it. Anyway, while that covers the large groups of people who would have wanted Barry dead as well as the specific name that came up, there's also one specific unnamed person that came up in the investigation. The Walking Man, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Richard Dawson. Okie dokie. A surveillance camera at a neighbor's house caught 21 seconds of a man walking down the sidewalk in the direction of Sherman's house right around the time of the murders. Police believe that this person could be the murderer, not only because of the proximity to the crime, but because of the way in which he walked. It looked pretty normal to me, but the man apparently wasn't walking so much as he was marching, indicating that he was likely ex-military. Though others believe his walk was the result of an injured leg. There is also evidence that he was on foot in the area for a long time surrounding the murder. Also, why the person is referred to as the walking man, because they're bundled up for the winter and it's relatively low-quality CCTV footage, we can't actually be sure if it's a man or woman. Police have said this person is a suspect and is believed to be the killer or one of the killers, but to date, they've never been identified. Of course, police also waited until 4 years after the murders to release the video, something for which they received heavy criticism. Police just not doing a very good job in this episode, are you? Seeing as this lead hadn't gone anywhere since being made public, it's unlikely that releasing it earlier would have made a difference, but you can understand people's frustration with how the entire case was handled. In fucking deed, Kevster. There was also one other piece of surveillance footage from a neighbour whose camera could see the Sherman's house clearly. At 9:11 a.m. on December the 14th, the morning after the murders took place, a man driving a generic sedan parked in front of the Sherman's house. He then got out of the car, entered the house through the front door, and went back to his car. The man did this 3 times, spending a total of 29 minutes inside the house until 10:16 a.m. when he drove off. This person is also unidentified, at least publicly, and the security footage has not been released. It's possible that the police never released the footage because they tracked down the individual and were able to rule him out as a suspect, but if that's the case, they haven't said anything to that effect. Unfortunately, that is all the evidence there is. There was basically no evidence inside the house and just 2 clips from security cameras. One of those wasn't made public, and the other shows a person whose age and gender are unidentifiable from the video. All you can do is vaguely tell their height. Given how little evidence there is, the potential list of suspects is seemingly endless, as are the motives. This could have been a murder for hire by a rival executive. It could have been something more personal, like a family member or a friend who wanted them dead. It could have been an assassination by someone angry about Canada's drug prices. Or as impossible as it seems, it theoretically could have just been Barry all along. I don't think so. I think Barry's also like, I don't know, he seems like a douchebag. And I think probably like narcissistic douchebag, right? Tend to be. I got those vibes. I don't think he'd kill himself. I think he thinks he's too awesome for that. There's even a theory that one of Barry and Honey's 4 children could have been responsible for the murder. I can't find a coherent explanation for why that would be the case, but the speculation stems from the fact that only their first child biologically belonged to both of them. Honey had a hard time conceiving and suffered multiple miscarriages. She gave birth to 1 child, but the others were born using IVF and surrogates. Well, then they're still your children. What the f***? Barry's sperm was used to make all 3 embryos. But each used a donor egg from a different woman that wasn't Honey. Okay, there we go. So Barry is kind of like Elon Musk before Elon Musk. Not really. Because he just wanted children with his wife. It's not like he then went and had different relationships with all of these random donor eggs. He absolutely didn't. Anyway, I'm not sure how this would justify murder because there isn't any reporting about Honey favouring her biological child over the others, but this case is riddled with baseless accusation. Even though this case is relatively recent, I'm not convinced we'll ever get an answer. There are too many motives and too little evidence, so there's not really any way to narrow it down. But hey, you're more than welcome to prove me wrong, especially since the family is offering a $35 million reward for information that leads to the arrest of the killer. That number's in Canadian dollars, but it's still $25.5 million in real money, which isn't bad at all. God damn! That's some motivation right there. If I was a private detective, I'd be like, yeah, maybe I'm just going to try and solve this one. $25 million. Ray Rivera. Ray Rivera was born on June the 10th, 1973, on a US Air Force base in Madrid in Spain. His parents were from Puerto Rico, and his father, a member of the Air Force, was stationed in Madrid at the time. Shortly after his birth, family moved to Winter Park in Florida. I don't imagine Wintry Park in Florida is very wintry, right? Florida's got like nice weather all year round, is that right? I mean, other than all the tornadoes and the Florida people. Growing up, Ray had a lot of different talents, most notably music and athletics. His sister played piano, and whenever she played a song, Ray was said to be able to memorize it and play it back by ear. He also taught himself to play the Puerto Rican cuatro. I don't know what that is, but fantastic. That's a Latin American instrument based on the Spanish guitar, and it was named cuatro because it had 4 strings. At least the ones found around the rest of Latin America did. The Puerto Rican Cuatro had 10 strings instead of 4, and the instrument's body was shaped more like a violin than a guitar, though it was still guitar-sized. Fascinating. I'm so glad in this true crime episode we got to learn about a Puerto Rican guitar, Kevin. I know Kevin's really into music, I think. I remember it. Doesn't he play the horn? Does Kevin play the horn? For athletics, Ray was originally involved in swimming and baseball, but in high school he joined the school's water polo team. I've never actually seen water polo and don't know anything about it, but I've always wondered how they get the horses into the pool. Dude, for the longest time I did think that water polo was polo in the water. Like, I just imagined horses going around, and I think I saw some American TV show where they were playing water polo, and I'm like, where's the fucking horses? How do you play polo without a polo horse? My ignorance aside, Ray was incredibly good at water polo, so good that in his junior year of high school he was invited to an Olympic camp at UC Berkeley. He also received an athletics scholarship to the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, where he majored in English. However, it was while he was in high school that he made one of his lifelong friends, fellow member of the water polo team, Porter Stansbury. Making friends was easy for Ray. He was charming, outgoing, always smiling and trying to make people laugh, and was just a fun person to be around. He wasn't just a clown, though. He was known to be very thoughtful and sensitive. He was also good-looking, 6'5", and an athlete, which probably didn't hurt his social prospects either. No. Things are looking up for Ray. Ray continued to succeed in water polo throughout college, and in the summer of 1994 he was selected for the U.S. Olympic Festival in St. Louis, Missouri. If you're unfamiliar with the U.S. Olympic, can you become president if you're born on a military? I know it's a completely random thought. Can you become president if you're from Puerto Rico? Because it's a territory, right? I guess that means you can. But because you have to actually be born in America to become president, right? I remember learning this because I was disappointed to find out that Arnold Schwarzenegger can't become president because even though he's an American, he wasn't born in America. If you're born on a military base, does that count? Probably, right? I mean, I don't think this is the episode where Ray Rivera becomes president because I haven't heard of President Rivera. I think that would be quite a notable thing. Anyway, he was selected for some sort of Olympic festival in St. Louis in 1994. This is in Missouri, by the way, and if you're unfamiliar with the US Olympic Festival, which I absolutely am, which most people probably are since they stopped doing it in 1995, it was basically a mini version of the Olympics designed to allow American athletes to develop in a similar setting to an international competition. Okie dokie. The festival was created in 1978, and it was believed that this sort of training was necessary for the United States to succeed at the Olympics, as the communists had been running a similar event, Spartakiad, for decades by this point. Yeah, and wasn't the Soviet Union dominating at the Olympics for a while? The festival also served as a sort of scouting tool to see which athletes really had the talent necessary to represent the US at the Olympic Games. In 1995, Ray finished college, and he was recruited to the Royal Spanish Swimming Federation to play water polo for them. It was an incredible opportunity, and kind of a neat coincidence, so Ray turned to the country where he was originally born. By virtue of his parents being Puerto Rican, Ray already spoke Spanish before he moved to Spain. All right, Ray. He's tall, he's good looking, he's an athlete, he's charming, he speaks multiple languages. Okay, Ray. All right. Steady on. So instead of moving to a new country and having to learn a new language, he instead taught English to make a little extra money. This life change didn't last long though. Although things were going well, Ray was abruptly forced to move back to the United States after receiving a phone call inviting him to compete in the 1996 Olympics as a member of the men's water polo team. I had no idea that water polo was an Olympic sport. Isn't it? It doesn't feel like that big of a sport, does it? He immediately left Spain to go back and train for the games that were being held in Atlanta, Georgia that year. I know that. They had a little mascot. There was a spring because my aunt lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and she came to visit, I guess around 1996, and she bought us these Olympic mascot toys, which I had for years sitting on a shelf. But he didn't actually get to compete just weeks before the Olympics were set to begin. Ray was cut from the team. Unfortunately, there's no official or verifiable reason for why this happened. I've seen speculation that he was cut after having a disagreement with the coach, but there doesn't seem to be much to support this. In fact, these sorts of last-minute cuts are pretty normal for Olympic team sports, and it's not only possible but likely that Ray was cut simply for not being good enough. What a loser. Not being good enough at the Olympics. Pfft. Loser. Second-rate Ray. No, I'm joking. I imagine Ray's going to get killed somehow. We're not going to find out who killed him. It's very impressive. I'm just joking. Unless Ray's turns out to be the criminal in this one, which he's not going to be because it's unsolved, right? So I'll just shut up. If nothing else, the fact that Ray largely gave up on sports after being cut from the team indicates that he probably was let go for performance reasons. As the old saying goes, though, those who can do, those who can't teach. And so Ray moved to Burbank, California to become a teacher. What, of water polo? Okay, so that's not why he moved to Burbank. He moved there because it's relatively close to Hollywood. Ray was an English major after all, and following the crushing disappointment of being cut from the Olympic team, he decided he wanted to become a screenwriter. That takes time and luck, though, so in the interim he took a job teaching Spanish and coaching the swim team and water polo team at a local high school. He also had a third job working in the admissions office of an LA film school. And while his writing career wasn't taking off, all of Ray's students liked him and thought that he was a good teacher and coach. This went on for a few years, and then in 1999 or 2000, Ray was introduced to Allison Jones through a friend of theirs. Allison was an accountant with a degree from UCLA who had also been an athlete and enjoyed writing. The two really hit it off, and they began dating seriously and eventually moved in together in Los Angeles. By 2004, Ray really wanted to propose, but they were struggling financially. LA, not exactly cheap, and Ray's writing career wasn't going anywhere. My personal advice to Ray would have been to try his hand at non-fiction instead of writing screenplays. Telling people about things that already happened is way easier than needing to have actual ideas or creativity of your own. That's not true, Kevin. I think you're filled with creativity. It'd be awkward if Kevin wasn't talking about himself at all there, wouldn't it? I mean, not really, because Kevin's reaction to this will probably be when he's alone and he can't come and hurt me. Anyway, even though his writing career didn't exactly seem to be going anywhere, Ray decided to propose anyway. Sure, they didn't have any money for the wedding to start a family, but they could figure that out later. All that mattered was that they were in love and they wanted to spend their lives together. And as it turned out, they didn't even need to figure it out. Remember Porter Stansbury, Ray's high school buddy from water polo? While Ray was chasing his dream of becoming a writer, Porter had moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and started his own company, Stansbury & Associates Investment Research. I say it was his own company, but it was technically a subsidiary of publisher Agora Inc., and Porter had received seed money from Agora to start his business. Well, then it is his company, isn't it? And Agora is just kind of an investor. Regardless, business was going great. People would pay Stansbury money, and in return he gave them a newsletter full of worthless... Wait, what's the word? Investment research. Oh, okay, I thought he was running like a bank or something, but it's literal investment research, like investment research that they are giving to other people. But don't take that evaluation from me, take it from the Securities and Exchange Commission and their fraud lawsuit against Stansbury. In 2002, Stansbury Research sent out an email saying that for just $1,000, they would tell you the name of a company that had just acquired a contract to dismantle Russian nuclear weapons. This was the event that initially triggered the lawsuit, with the SEC referring to Stansbury's newsletters as containing nothing but baseless speculation and outright lies. Oh no! In 2007, Porter and his company were found guilty of fraud and ordered to pay $1.5 million in damages. In 2014, the company also put out a blitz of advertisement warning that the US currency would officially crash on the 1st of July 2014 once House Resolution 2847 was implemented. All right. It's like officially going to crash, like they've officially set a date for it. Porter, you sound like quite sketchy, mate. And by sound, I mean the Securities and Exchange Commission said that you were sketchy because you were found guilty of fraud. He keeps going though, 7 years later, 2007, he gets that big ass fine. 2014, he's like, yes. For the low price of just $149 annually, Stansbury in his newsletter would help protect you against the impending financial collapse. Just so we're clear, US currency did not crash in 2014, and HR 2847 was a bill about providing payroll tax breaks and other business incentives to companies who hired unemployed Americans. That doesn't sound like it's going to be bad for the economy. That sounds like it's going to be good for the economy. So yes, it was just nonsensical fear-mongering meant to steal money from people who fell for their scare tactics. So yes, that's the kind of company that Stansbury Research was. And in 2004, Porter offered to hire Ray to write the company's new financial newsletter, The Rebound Report, which is a great name for a newsletter. A financial newsletter, I like that. The newsletter was all about stocks that had been falling in price, but that Stansbury believed were going to rebound. That they got Ray, the water polo aspiring Hollywood screenwriter, to write, because he knows so much about stocks. It wasn't really the kind of writing he wanted to be doing, and neither he nor Allison were thrilled about the idea of moving to Baltimore. Oh, this was the price. That's just like Kevin writes this from, I want to say Massachusetts, pretty sure it's Massachusetts. And yeah, but it's 2004. The internet in 2004. Couldn't he just done it from his nice little pad in LA? That said, the job was going to pay really well, and Baltimore was way cheaper than LA. They were eventually able to purchase a house in Baltimore, and their mortgage payments were less than their monthly rent in LA had been. But the plan was to give it just 2 years in Baltimore, and then they could reevaluate their financial situation and consider moving away again. Ray moved to Baltimore first, while Allison stayed in LA for a few months to finish up some work commitments. Things went okay for Ray at his new job for a while, but he didn't really like the work. No, it's not what he wants to be doing, and it sounds really, really, really boring. Not only was it not the kind of writing that he wanted to do, but most of the stocks he wrote about didn't actually rebound. Granted, he wasn't actually the one picking the stocks. Okay, that's good. That was done by Stansberry's analysts or possibly soothsayers. They're just in a room throwing a dice and being like, yeah, number 5. What was number 5 again, Bob? But he still wasn't, allegedly, that's just a joke. Unless the SEC agree with me later, let's find out. But he still wasn't a fan of writing financial advice, particularly incorrect advice. After about 18 months working for Stansberry, Ray called it quits. Porter had made it sound like this was going to be a short-term gig anyway, so it was time to move on. Short-term gig where he goes and buys a house in a new town, okay? Even if the job did pay extremely well. Instead, he took out a $15,000 cash advance on Allison's credit card to buy some equipment and started his own video production company. He did videography work primarily for Agora's other subsidiaries that shared the Baltimore office space and continued working on his screenplay. And just to be clear, this wasn't some secret thing where he stole Allison's card and took out the giant cash advance or anything. She was well aware that a 9-to-5 desk job wasn't a good fit for Ray, and as far as I could tell, she was supportive of the career move. Well, that's very nice of you. A cash advance on a credit card, though, Jesus Christ, that's going to be expensive if you don't pay it back in the 30 days or whatever. He wasn't making as much money as he had at Stansberry, but he still had steady work that he actually enjoyed. Yep, I'd much rather make less money and do something I actually enjoy. Like, I think enjoying work's really important. As long as you've got enough money, as an almost, I like money as well. I don't know. Something like this would just grind down my soul. Like writing incorrect financial advice. In November of 2005, almost 2 years after moving to Baltimore, it was finally time for Ray and Allison to get married. They had what I can only assume was a lovely wedding ceremony in Puerto Rico, followed by what I can only hope was a honeymoon that would be highly inappropriate for YouTube. Okay, Kevster. But the bliss of marriage wasn't going to last long, by no fault of their own. A little over a month after their wedding, Ray's friend and fellow Agora employee, Tom Hickling, died while in Africa. Tom had gone to visit his daughter, Holly, who was doing relief work in Zambia, but they were in a car crash. An ambulance arrived and found that Tom wasn't seriously injured, while Holly had broken a leg and suffered head trauma. She asked Tom if he was okay, to which he replied, "Yeah, I'll be fine." So Holly was taken to the hospital, while Tom stayed in her car. A few hours later, Tom's wife received a phone call. A passerby had seen the car and found her phone number inside Holly's notebook. The caller wanted to let her know that they'd found a crashed car registered to Holly Hickling and that there was a dead white guy inside it. Apparently, despite what the ambulance workers had believed, Tom was very much not fine. He'd died from serious trauma to the back of his head, presumably resulting from the car crash. I only say presumably because there was no autopsy performed, with Tom being cremated in Zambia, so his ashes could be shipped back to the United States. I feel like an autopsy there would be quite important. But, yeah, who's the famous comedian who they think fell over in the bathtub and then was like, ow, that hurt, and then lay down and died on his hotel bed? It's really bad. I can't remember his name. He's very funny. No, it doesn't matter. This seemed to have a huge impact on Ray, as he felt that the death was suspicious, and on the one hand, it sort of was. Tom said that he was fine, and the emergency responders agreed, then he suddenly died in the car. I mean, maybe like, he just had brain trauma that they didn't pick up on. Like, the brain's really complicated, and sometimes this happens. On the other hand, maybe the emergency responders were just inexperienced and underqualified. This is apparently an area where relief work was necessary, so there's a good chance that existing medical care was extremely inadequate. Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but also yes. Or maybe Tom had no visible injuries and everything was internal, so all they could do was go by his own self-evaluation. Realistically, it was far more unfortunate and potentially preventable than it was suspicious, but it still sucked, and Ray took it really hard. By the spring of 2006, just a few months later, it was time for Ray and Allison to move back to LA. They had given Baltimore a chance for over 2 years, but with Ray no longer working for Stansberry, there was no reason to stay. Doesn't he have all the video clients that kind of pay the bills there, though, from Agora, the subsidiary companies? He could do freelance videography work back in LA, and it's easier as a screenwriter to be closer to Hollywood so you can network and such. Also, isn't LA going to be overrun with videographers? People who just want to be in the movies but aren't? Plus, he had just finished writing his screenplay, so this would give him an opportunity to pitch it in person. The couple put their house up for sale in April, and they traveled to LA to make plans for their move back. But when they got back to Baltimore from their trip, Ray began acting weird. The normally outgoing and cheerful Ray now seemed nervous, agitated, and permanently on edge. Okay. All of a sudden, he refused to let Alison go anywhere without him. In early May, she was going out and running at a nearby track, but Ray insisted that he go with her, despite her insistence that she was going to be fine. Ray sat on the bleachers reading a book while Alison ran laps on the track. At one point, a man started walking on the track in the general direction of Alison, because that's what people do on a track. Ray reportedly jumped out of his seat and started running at the man, though the guy wound up leaving without incident. Maybe he was just cutting through the area, or maybe he saw some giant dude sprinting at him and decided he should get the hell out of there. What's gone wrong with Ray? Has this death in Zambia? Zambia? Somewhere? Zambia? Doesn't matter. Somewhere in Africa. Has this made him, a bit funny about personal safety? Either way, this was both out of character for Ray and really bizarre behavior. Did he also get a knock on the head or something? He also took a sudden interest in the Freemasons, because why not? Has he had a mental break or something? Something doesn't seem right here. Ray spent much of Mother's Day weekend reading The Builders, a book about the Masons. On Mother's Day, he and Alison went to church, but when they got home, Ray made a quick phone call to Porter. There was no answer, so Alison heard him leave a message saying, "Hey man, give me a call back. I've finally got it all figured out." Is Ray losing his mind? Is Ray going a little bit cray-cray? At the time, she assumed this was related to one of his videography projects for Agora, though Porter never called back or asked about the voicemail, which was weird. If it was related to a project for Agora, you'd think Porter would have called back as soon as he could. Well, Agora is just the investor in Porter's company, right? Not necessarily to do with him. And if it wasn't about that, you'd think he'd have called back to ask Ray what the he was on about. Yeah, I do agree that it should have called him back, though. It's kind of polite. There was also a conversation where Ray asked Porter if he was part of the leadership of the Freemasons, but Porter had just assumed it was a joke. Yeah, I think you got to be to be a leader in the Freemasons, then you have to be quite old. Also, Freemasons aren't secret. He'd probably know if Porter was a member. The next day was Monday, May 15th, and both Ray and Alison had a busy week ahead of them. Ray had a hard deadline coming up for one of his video editing projects, and Alison was going to be going away for a business trip the next day. Unfortunately, what was Alison's job? Was she an accountant? Unfortunately, neither of them probably got as much sleep as they would have wanted. Earlier that morning, at about 1 a.m., the house's alarm had gone off. The noise woke Alison up, and she jumped out of bed and ran downstairs. When she got downstairs, she saw Ray running out of his office with a baseball bat. So I guess Ray may have been awake working anyway, so didn't lose any sleep. Still, Alison noted that Ray looked terrified, which was unusual for him. Obviously, it's not strange to be scared if your security system goes off in the middle of the night, but she had never seen him as scared as he looked in that moment. Police eventually showed up to investigate the situation. They didn't see any signs of an attempt at a forced entry, so their official determination was that it was probably just some stupid squirrels or something. And on the surface, not a crazy assessment, I suppose. However, Alison didn't really buy this explanation. I mean, if my alarm system went off and there was no one there, I'd just be like, alarm system. I'd just be like, yeah, it just went off for no reason. Number of times my alarm, where I've been living or whatever, smoke alarm, fire alarm, burglar alarm has gone off. Hundreds? I don't know. Dozens? It's a lot. Number of times it's actually been a fire or an intruder? 0. In fact, probably most often it's me just forgetting the alarms on or just forgetting the code. Have you ever done that where you get, I remember I was working somewhere and I was opening up the shop and I go in and I'd been there, I don't know, a couple of months. I'd entered the alarm code, dozens of times, and I was going. It was like, beep, 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 beep. And I'm standing at the alarm, and I'm like, wow, just completely forgot the code. And the alarm goes off, and I'm phoning the dude who owns the store at 6 a.m. I'm like, dude, I don't know how this happened, but I don't remember the alarm code. And he's like, oh, yeah. This is quality bossmanship, where he was like, oh, yeah, dude, I've been there as well. It just escapes you sometimes, doesn't it? It's this, and that was that. And I'm like, legend. Because I'd be like, what, you stupid, bro? The way their security system worked, they would have had to have been pressure placed on the screen inside the window in order for it to go off. This would happen if someone attempted to break in, but it shouldn't happen from animals doing random either. After all, they'd lived in the house for about 2 years by that point, and the alarm had never gone off before. Even though, yeah, but sometimes it just happens. It can just be a fault, even. I feel like it's more likely to be a fault than it is a burglar. Even though Alison didn't think animals should be able to trigger the system, she figured that was probably just a fluke. Maybe it was animals, maybe it was something else, but surely it was a one-time thing and nothing to worry about. If you can't tell exactly where this is going, the next morning at 1 a.m., Allison and Ray woke to the sound of the alarm going off again. In that case, I'd be like, well, it's definitely a fault. Like, if it's going off at exactly the same time, and like something is causing it to go off at 1 o'clock. Like clockwork, what is it? Burglars don't operate on clockwork. Once again, the police believed it was nothing, though Allison claimed that one of the windows appeared to have been tampered with. As if someone was trying to break in. Allegedly, it was one of the windows to their bedroom that looked like it had been tampered with, but that doesn't make a ton of sense since their bedroom was on the second floor. Regardless, their security system never went off again. The couple got back to sleep, and later that morning it was time for Allison to get ready to leave for a business trip. Ray made her breakfast and then helped her carry her luggage to the car that was taking her to the airport. Before she left, Allison said, "I love you," and Ray said, "Thank you for loving me." It's not as rude as Han Solo saying, "I know," but I personally find that kind of a weird response. Yeah, but maybe it's the thing. Like, I will purposefully say to my wife, she says, "I love you," I'll be like, "Thank you." But she knows what it really means. And it's like, it's just a fun little joke. I feel like this could just be a fun little joke. Maybe it's just a thing they did, though. There you go. Besides, it's not like either of them knew this was the last time they'd ever speak to each other. Later that day, Ray stopped by at the local Masonic Lodge to ask about joining. Despite being the world's oldest and allegedly most powerful secret society, their presence is extremely well known, and the Masons are more than happy to let talk to anyone who wants to join. Yeah, because they're not really a secret society. They even have radio commercials soliciting these conventions from anybody who might be interested in becoming a Mason. Anyway, according to the member he spoke to at the lodge, there was nothing unusual about the conversation. It was just your standard recruitment pitch. Ray also stopped by a local bookstore to pick up a copy of Freemasons for Dummies. Bro's really going down the Freemason rabbit hole, isn't he? I feel like he probably should have read this before reading The Builders or inquiring about joining, but what do I know? He spent the rest of the day working in his office, and he placed a call to book a video editing suite for a project that he was working on for Stansbury. The employee who took the call referred to it as banal, which isn't surprising since Ray had booked editing suites from this company multiple times already for other projects he worked on. Although Allison was away on a work trip, Ray wasn't actually home alone. That day, Allison's friend and colleague, Claudia, was staying the night. It doesn't seem like Claudia and Ray interacted much though, as Ray had been busy working and running Freemason-related errands. He did briefly leave his office to grab a bottle of grapefruit-flavored sparkling water and a bag of sour cream and onion potato chips, which he took back to his office. That is enormously specific. They're going to become important to the story, Kevin. Couldn't we just say chips? And now I want some sour cream and onion potato chips. That sounds delicious. Shortly after that, at around 6:30, Claudia said that she heard Ray take a phone call. He had a short conversation, followed by him yelling, "Oh," and running out of the house. A few minutes later, he ran back inside as if he had forgotten something. He then left again, driving away in Allison's SUV. That was roughly the same time Allison's work finished for the day, so she got settled into a hotel room and tried to call Ray at around 8 p.m. She then called Claudia, who relayed the information about him running out of the house. A few hours later, Allison called again, but there was still no sign of Ray. That was weird, but it wasn't necessarily without explanation. Allison knew that he had a deadline coming up, so maybe he was just really busy with his work and couldn't get back to her at that moment. The next morning, Allison called Claudia at around 5 a.m., but there was still no sign of Ray. This had gone from unusual to extremely concerning, and Allison returned home later that day. I'm unclear whether her business trip was only for one day or if she cut it short, but either is possible as Ray's older brother Angel flew into Baltimore that afternoon to help search for Ray. Over the next couple of days, more family members would travel to Baltimore to aid in the search. Friends got involved in the search as well. Not only did Ray's former co-workers from Stansbury pitch in to help canvass the city, but Porter, Ray's best friend since high school, put up a reward of $1,000 for any information that would help locate Ray. As many pointed out, and I'm inclined to agree with, that is pretty suspicious. Wait, why is it suspicious? Put him information to locate Ray. Why is that suspicious? It's his mate. Porter was some douchey finance bro who made enough money to pay a $1.5 million fine to the SEC without it bankrupting his company. Sure, but the $1.5 million fine from the SEC is something you have to pay or you go bankrupt. Just 6 months earlier, he arrived at Ray and Allison's wedding in Puerto Rico, disembarking from his private helicopter with a cigar hanging out of his mouth. Dude had more than enough money to offer a better reward for his best friend than just $1,000. Okay, first of all, I didn't realize he had private helicopter money. Like, running a company that gets a $1.5 million fine is like, okay, that doesn't really say much about the success of the company itself. But also, did anyone else put up any money? This doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world. And maybe $1,000 for just an adult who's gone missing for a couple of days is enough to get some information. Doesn't feel that insane. To be fair, I don't believe Porter had anything to do with Ray's disappearance, but this sure does make him look like a dick. I think it's nice that he put up $1,000, to be honest. Kevin, if you went missing, I'd put up $1,000 for you, mate. And maybe I won't now, Kevin. Maybe I won't. Maybe it's better Kevin's missing. Maybe it's better someone's now wearing his face as a mask. I'm sorry, Kevin, I don't mean it. Anyway, friends and family searched for days, but there was little to go on. Ray had run out of the house with no explanation, and he didn't really leave any clues behind. His soda and chips had gone unfinished, and the lights in his office were left on. All further evidence that he left in a hurry. His Invisalign retainer, I've done that, just in case you couldn't tell, was left sitting on the desk next to the food, as you're supposed to take the retainers out while eating. Yeah, if you don't take the retainers out when you're eating, it's going to be messy. And weird. This suggested that wherever he was going, he didn't plan on being there very long. Upon opening Ray's laptop, Allison saw that his web browser was currently on a page showing the exact time for sunrise and sunset in Baltimore. That wasn't particularly useful information, and there didn't seem to be anything else of note open on the computer. After days of finding nothing, Allison was starting to lose hope. On May 22nd, a week after Ray's disappearance, Allison's parents, who'd flown in from Colorado, offered to go around Baltimore and check parking lots to see if they could find the missing SUV, hoping that it might provide a clue as to Ray's whereabouts. Yeah, that's definitely something you should be looking for. I feel like looking for the car would be the main thing, because the car's going to lead to clues, and cars are a lot easier to spot than a random dude. Allison doubted that they'd ever find it, but she told them to go ahead and look anyway. And it's a good thing they did, because lo and behold, in a paid parking lot used by the historic Belvedere Hotel, they found Allison's car with a parking ticket on the windshield. They spoke with a parking attendant, who had a surprising amount of information about the car. The parking ticket was dated May 17th, the day after Ray's disappearance. The attendant remembered that when he left work the day before at 6 p.m, the SUV wasn't there, but when he arrived the next morning it was. That was when he issued the ticket. The timing wasn't particularly helpful as it lined up with when Ray left the house, but at least the location might prove useful. This was an area Ray frequented, usually during business hours, as it was just a block or two from the Agora building. However, he and Allison had been to the Belvedere Hotel multiple times in the past as well. They went to the hotel's Owl Bar for drinks on a couple of occasions, and once they had visited the building's roof to watch the sunset together. Probably wasn't supposed to be, but the roof was easily accessible for anyone who wanted to get there, with the door usually left open by employees who went up there for smoke breaks. Of course, none of this answered exactly where Ray was or what he was doing, but at least everybody could narrow down their search. It still didn't seem to help, though, as Ray appeared to have vanished without a trace. It was around lunchtime on May the 24th, 2 days later, when Ray's friends and former co-workers... What? I literally stopped there, like frozen in my tracks, because I'm like, Ray's friends and former co-workers, Mark Whistler, Stephen King, and George Rayburn. What? 1, Mark Whistler's my dad. 2, Stephen King. I don't know who the f*** George Rayburn is, but really? What the odds? Oh, that's crazy. I've never met anyone with the same surname as me, other than my family. And George Rayburn ran into each other near the parking lot where the SUV had been found. The three friends had been active in the search, particularly focused on handing out missing persons flyers. While they were talking, they decided that they might as well go to the top of the adjacent parking garage to get a better view of the area. I don't know if Kevin's with me, but then why would he not? Why would he choose the name? How would he choose the name Mark randomly, and also Stephen King? I'm so confused, Kevin. And you're not even pointing out that the dude's got the same surname as me. It's not a common surname. What's happening? I don't realistically know what they expected to see from up there, but they definitely weren't planning on what they saw. As the three men looked out from atop the parking garage, they saw the adjacent rooftop of the Belvedere Hotel. Or like a subroof, it wasn't the top of the hotel, but the Belvedere had a 3-story attachment, and this was the roof to that. From the top of the 7-layer parking garage, the men noticed a large flip-flop on the roof of the hotel. They then saw another one several feet away, then a pair of sunglasses, a cell phone, and a set of keys. Most importantly, they saw a 40-inch hole in the roof that had clearly been broken inward. It was at that point that they called the police. The lead detective on the case, got the building manager for the Belvedere to take him to exactly where the hole in the roof would lead to. The hole was above a conference room that had been unused for some time now. A catering company was using the office space across the hall, and they'd been complaining about a smell coming from the locked room for a few days, but apparently they didn't complain enough for anyone to do anything about it. Everyone just kind of assumed there was a dead animal in the wall and left it at that. When the building manager opened the room for the police, he immediately ran out to escape the overpowering smell of decomposing flesh. There was dried blood from the hole in the ceiling down the wall, and Ray's body was pressed against the wall. In Ray's pockets were his driver's license, his American Express card, and a penny with a hole cut out in the shape of a heart. The penny had been a gift from Allison, something she gave him so that he could hold it and think of her whenever she went away on business trips. That's sweet. However, this wasn't something Ray typically carried around with him. It was usually kept in a bowl on his dresser. To be fair, though, if he did keep it in his pocket whenever Allison was gone so that he could have her heart close to him or whatever, it's not like she would have known. It would have been back in the bowl on the dresser when she returned. Well, yeah, exactly. He's taken it while she's away, so he remembers about her, which is very, very sweet. There was something missing from his pocket, though, an engraved money clip Allison had given him as a wedding present. This was something that he always carried with him to hold his money and credit cards, and if the cards were still in his pocket, it seems unlikely that the rest of the money clip would have flown out. Ray's body was badly injured and in a moderate state of decomposition, so an autopsy had to be performed to determine a cause of death. There was a lot of inconsistent information about the autopsy, which is weird because the full autopsy is publicly available. Unsurprisingly, the coroner determined that the cause of death was a fall from a great height. No, Sherlock. Specifically a 13-story fall from the upper roof of the Belvedere Hotel through this lower roof. Many sources state that the injuries weren't consistent with a fall from that height, arguing that it was more like someone who was hit by a car at high speeds, specifically because the injuries were almost exactly on one side of the body. What, so he got hit by a car at high speed and the person thought, I'm going to get rid of this body, I'm going to take it up to the top of that hotel, carry it all the way up there, take some shit out of his pockets, and then throw him off into a conference room below. That makes no sense, people. I'm not sure how they came to that conclusion though, because the autopsy contains a long list of injuries on both sides of the body, including broken ribs on both sides. The only thing that's particularly surprising is that the spine wasn't broken at all, something you'd very much expect to break if a person fell 13 stories. The report also mentioned that a comprehensive toxicology screen tested negative for drugs. There was some amount of alcohol found in the sample, though it was noted that this could have been partly or entirely the result of decomposition, rather than from Ray drinking anything beforehand. It was the opinion of the coroner that Ray's injuries were consistent with a fall from a great height, but she classified the manner of death as undetermined because there was no evidence to indicate exactly how he had fallen. Does it matter? He still fell. The most obvious answer for how this happened was that Ray jumped, but this didn't make a lot of sense. On the day that Ray died, he'd booked a video editing suite for a few days. He had gone to the Masonic Lodge to inquire about becoming a member. People who intend to kill themselves generally don't go making plans for the future like this. It's also stated that he had no history of mental illness, and all his friends and family thought he'd been acting completely normal. Yeah, but he hadn't been acting completely normal, had he? He'd been acting a bit weird in the previous few days. We talked about that. While no history of mental illness is true, I dispute the claim that he'd been acting normal. Ever since returning from LA to plan the move back, everyone had noticed that he seemed nervous and agitated. Allison had also mentioned that weird incident when Ray basically chased a guy off the public track while she was running, but now they wanted to say that he was just the same old Ray. I understand them not wanting to accept that he may have done this to himself, but we can't ignore previous remarks they made about the perceived change in his mental state just because they no longer want to believe it. That said, this wasn't exactly a clear-cut case either. The biggest question was how on earth Ray's body could have wound up where it did. Police investigators identified exactly 3 locations from which a person could have jumped and landed where Ray did. The first was the parking garage from which Ray's friends initially discovered the hole. While a person could easily jump from that roof to where the hole in the Belvedere's roof was, they would never actually go through it. This was the real world, not an action movie where buildings are all made out of paper mache and plywood. It was only a 20-foot drop from the garage to the Belvedere's roof, and a fall from that height wouldn't have generated nearly enough force to break the roof. Chances are the fall wouldn't have been even fatal, though it would have been extremely unpleasant. And that just left 2 locations from the Belvedere Hotel where police believed a person could have jumped from. One was alleged that can so obviously be ruled out that I'm not even going to go over it. That just left the upper roof of the Belvedere, the most likely place Ray would have fallen from. The thing is, though, he couldn't have simply fallen and landed on the roof where he did. He would have needed to get a really good running start. Okay. From the upper roof of the Belvedere to the hole that Ray's body went through was a 45-foot horizontal gap. It would have taken about 3 seconds to make impact from that height, which meant Ray would have needed a horizontal speed of about 10 miles per hour. That's by no means an impossible sprinting speed for someone as athletic as Ray, but it's unclear if there was actually room to reach such a speed. Ray would only have been able to get a 15-foot long running start. That is not enough. That's still not impossible, but it's also like the bare minimum distance needed to reach a full sprint. Making this jump would have required a bit of intentionality that calls into question whether or not he could have made the jump. There were a bunch of little things too, like how the alarm had gone off 2 nights in a row and Allison believed that the window looked like it had been tampered with. And how did Ray's belongings wind up outside on the lower roof that Ray fell through? More than that, how was it that his phone and glasses were relatively unharmed? There was minor scratching to both, but the glasses were fully intact and the phone was unbroken and still working. Despite both of those surviving the fall, the thong on one of the flip-flops had broken. There was also the mysterious phone call that caused Ray to run out of his house in a hurry, only to quickly return and run out again. Unfortunately, the call could not be properly traced. While it's widely reported that the last call to Ray came from Agora, there would be no way to tell who made the call. Agora used a switchboard system, so the phone call could have come from any phone in the offices of the various subsidiaries in the Agora building. The most obvious answer would be that it came from Stansbury, as Ray was working on a deadline for them, and that was where he knew the most people. But Porter said that this was impossible. According to Porter, he and all the Stansbury employees that had worked with Ray were at a corporate retreat on Maryland's eastern shore at the time the call was made. Seems like something easy enough to verify. Reportedly, Porter stopped cooperating with police after this statement and put a gag order on his employees, barring them from saying anything to the police. Is that allowed? I mean, I guess it is. Unless they get subpoenaed. The case wound up being covered by Netflix in a reboot of Unsolved Mysteries, and Porter sure had some opinions about those allegations. He claimed to have had an interview with the second lead detective on the case, and there was no gag order for his employees. Instead, it simply instructed his employees to direct any questions from law enforcement to their public relations team or something like that. Which, honestly, makes a load of sense. I haven't been terribly kind to Porter this episode, but this is totally fair and exactly what I would expect any company to do in a situation like this. Yep. Also, there's some debate over where the phone call came from. While most reports state that it came from the Agora switchboard, the original statement from police said that it came from the Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore where Ray and Allison lived. It has been proposed that both could be true and that someone from Fells Point could have called Agora and been directed to Ray's personal cell by the switchboard. I don't know how probable this is, but seeing as it seemed to be freelancing exclusively for Agora, I wouldn't call it impossible. So, there was the impossible but not impossible jumping distance and a bunch of little things that made it look like there was more at play here than Ray simply choosing to jump off the building. Allison hired a private detective to help prove that there was foul play involved, and they discovered a rather unusual detail. If police believed the most likely thing to have happened was that Ray jumped off the roof, then the first course of action would be to examine security footage from the hotel. That would show whether or not Ray was there and who, if anyone, he was with. It was a pretty straightforward plan, thwarted only by the fact that there wasn't any footage from that day. There were security recordings for May 15th and May 17th, but not for May 16th, when Ray disappeared. Isn't it weird how often otherwise functional cameras always seem to have been malfunctioning when there's a suspicious death? Yes, exactly, like Jeffrey Epstein's cell. But the weirdest discovery came when Allison checked Ray's computer. Tagged to the back of the computer was a small piece of paper containing a surprisingly long note in annoyingly small type. While Unsolved Mysteries did make a picture of the note publicly available, it's not high resolution enough to make out what it says. Here's an idea of what I'm working with, Simon. Oh, Jesus Christ, that's tiny. Oh, that's really, really tiny. There's a lot of lists on here. It's like one of those things you photocopy down. So yes, the note was impossibly small, and we don't have a high-quality image to work with. That's okay, though, because even if we could read it all, it still doesn't really make much sense. The letter begins, as best as I can decipher, "Brothers and sisters, right now around the world volcanoes are erupting. What an awesome sight. Virtus drunix mors non separabit. Whom virtue unites, death will not separate. This was a well-played game. Congratulations to all who participated. I hope you enjoyed it. But it was time to wake up. So here I am." I'd like to welcome those who accepted our invitations for membership during the game. We couldn't have done it without you. I look on this endeavor to find the truth, but not for its own sake. In accepting this quest for the truth, I hoped to make myself, with the help of others, into a man ready and worthy to receive it. Bro's lost his... Bro's like... He's had a psychotic break, right? Members of the council, please note that I will lend careful consideration to the traditional responsibilities in light of these proceedings, and I will satisfy the standard request of the council within the appropriate time. What are you talking about? The introduction just keeps on going, and there's no agreed upon transcription, but you get the gist of the tone at least. If you're curious about that Latin phrase, it's a saying used by the Freemasons. The letter goes on to make reference to people who gave their lives to this pursuit, including Stanley Kubrick and Ray's friend Tom, along with the expectation that the council would restore them to life. Ray goes on to request the council compensate those who took part in the venture by making them 5 years younger. This includes an incredibly long list of names of friends and family, including his wife. However, he referred to his wife by a maiden name of Alison Jones rather than Alison Rivera. Porter was also referenced in part of the letter, though it mentioned that he may have already personally put in a request to be made 5 years younger. Why? Dude is gone. He's like, this is something broke in his brain. There are multiple references to Porter, indicating that Ray believed that he was a fellow player in whatever game this letter was talking about. Ray went on to list a bunch of inventions and innovations that occurred in the time since his game began, and he requested that rights, patents, and proceeds from them all be forwarded to him through some means Porter allegedly set up. The list include things like RFID chips, MP3 players, MP3s in general, Invisalign, flash drives, the Human Genome Project, Sudoku, outsourcing. What are you doing? And again, the list just keeps on going. I don't know how a person could patent the concept of outsourcing or whatever sort of revenue they'd make from the patents, but whatever. Yeah, I don't think he's in his right mind. So I don't, don't worry, this isn't happening. It's like, oh yeah, who owns Invisalign? Oh, that dude, the dude, Ray. He went on to list all his various beautiful and fictitious properties around the world, followed by a list of movies, songs, and books that he happened to like, with a request to meet anyone who helped create them. He wrote directly to M. Night Shyamalan in this section, suggesting that he thought M. Night was a part of the game and would read this letter. And since Ray found M. Night's work to be such an inspiration, it unfortunately calls into question the quality of his own screenplays. Agreed. But regardless of how objectively terrible M. Night Shyamalan's work is, as a matter of fact, not my opinion, there is a very clear theme in a lot of the movies he listed. In addition to M. Night's contrived twists, there are also movies like Fight Club, The Da Vinci Code, National Treasure, and one that has gotten the most attention given how Ray died, The Game. Fantastic Michael Douglas movie. Also in this section, he listed stuff that he liked, like the song November Rain by Guns N' Roses. So I guess we can forgive him for liking a few bad movies. The Game's a great movie, so's Fight Club. National Treasure and Da Vinci Code, not so convinced. Anyway, there were lots of movies with twist endings and conspiratorial plotlines, and also Lord of the Rings. The FBI looked into the letter, and they determined that it was not written by someone who intended to end their own life, though it may have been written by someone in the middle of a psychotic break. Yeah, that seems real likely. Because the letter was typed, it is theoretically impossible to know if Ray was the one who wrote it or when he did. However, you may have noticed from the picture that the paper had been trimmed so that only the parts containing words remained, making it as small as possible. Alison said she found the scraps from that cut-up paper in the trash at Ray's office, indicating that he made the note the same day that he disappeared, or at least sometime after the trash can in his office had been emptied. The final oddity from this case came when Alison went down to the police station to pick up Ray's belongings. Among those items was Ray's computer, and the police informed Alison that someone other than her had called multiple times asking if they could pick up the computer and if the police had found anything on it. Apparently they couldn't be bothered to check the caller ID to log who was making these requests, but maybe they just assumed it was his brother. How about you don't assume that and you actually look into it, police? What the Shortly after Ray's items were released, the death was ruled a probable suicide by the Baltimore Police Department. However, the cause of death is officially listed as undetermined, which, combines with the strange details of the case, have led people to discuss some rather wild theories about the possibility of murder. And look, I get the appeal of treating this as a cryptic unsolved murder. Ray's friends and family don't believe he would have killed himself, and to this day, many of them are convinced that there's foul play involved. For Ray to have done this to himself, it would have also involved making an improbable but very much possible jump from a full sprint off the roof of the Belvedere Hotel in order to land where it did. This may not seem likely, but I don't understand how murder is supposed to be more likely. The theories about murder primarily involve someone pushing or throwing Ray off the roof of the hotel, and my question to those people would be, how the would someone do that? I've only mentioned his height before, but Ray was 6'5" and 260 pounds. Who the hell could possibly grab someone that size and throw them fully horizontally at 10 miles per hour? No one. Physically impossible. Anybody who is capable of doing that would most likely be locked away in a secret government prison for superpowered individuals, because the human body should not be capable of throwing something that size at that speed. No. A less physically impossible, but even more bizarre theory is that Ray was thrown out of a helicopter. This is likely a popular theory because it's known that Porter had his own helicopter, but it's still weird. It's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? Were they okay with the possibility of Ray's body landing on the sidewalk or street instead, knowing that anybody nearby would look up and see the helicopter that he must have fallen from? Yeah, it doesn't seem very bright to just drop someone from a helicopter in the middle of Los Angeles. Sure, I mean, like, out in the desert or whatever. Was it the Philippines dude? Was it the Philippines dude that the president who allegedly took those drug dealers out and just threw them out of a helicopter in the desert? For that matter, why would anyone have killed Ray in the first place? It's believed that perhaps Ray knew too much, and for that reason he had to be eliminated. Either he could have been learning things at Stansbury that he wasn't supposed to know, and Porter would be afraid he'd tell the SEC, or maybe his research into the Freemasons had led him to discover something about their secret rituals that wasn't supposed to be known to the public. No. No. Neither of these things seem likely, though. Ray's interest in the Freemasons appeared to be brand new, to the point that he purchased Freemasons for Dummies on the day that he died, and the stuff that the SEC was investigating all happened 2 years before Ray was even hired by Stansbury. Unfortunately, while this is a bizarre case that is viewed as among the most compelling unsolved murders, the most likely answer is that Ray suffered a psychotic break, which was likely triggered by the trauma of his friend's sudden and unexpected death, and he ended his own life, intentionally or otherwise. He and Allison had watched a sunset from atop the Belvedere Hotel roof before, and the last thing he did on his computer was look up the exact time sunset would occur that day. It's possible he took the penny with him to the roof as a way to watch one last sunset with his wife before jumping off. That's intense. You gotta, psychotic break is intense. But given that his latter, and some of his behavior shortly before his death, seems to indicate a sudden onset of severe mental problems, it's possible that he wasn't actually planning to die. Ray's notes seem to indicate he believed it was some sort of game being, oh my god, like the last scene in the game, the guy jumps off the roof of a hotel and lands on the roof and goes through the roof into the ballroom below. Oh my god, he thinks he's in a game. Oh, that's crazy. Ray's notes seem to say that he was part of a game being orchestrated by an Illuminati-style organization. He may have felt that he was in a situation nearly identical to the movie The Game, and that when he leapt from the roof, he would fall harmlessly into a big air cushion. That does still leave unanswered questions, though, like the money clip and the stranger calling about Ray's computer. Though it seems unlikely the money clip would fall out of Ray's pocket while the cards didn't, I'm going to assume that it is possible, and that if the money clip did fall out and got blown toward the ground mid-air, then that thing is gone forever. Maybe you have more faith in humanity than I do, Simon, but I assume that if a person finds a random money clip with cash on the ground, 9 times out of 10 they're just treating it as free money. Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to, if it's got cards and stuff so it's identifiable, then obviously you should return it and you shouldn't touch the money. But if it's just money, you just find money on the street, what are you supposed to do? Take it to the police station, be like, I found this money. And they're like, okay, what do you want us to do about it? I just realizing, maybe you could go to just start going around random hotels and businesses and places and be like, hey, I'm sorry, have you found a wallet? I lost my wallet and I'm just wondering if I left it in here. And they'll be like, oh, we did. Eventually it'd be like, oh, we did. And they'll be like, what does it look like? And I'll be like, oh, it's black. It's kind of square, just a standard ass looking wallet. And they'll be like, oh, no, this one was purple. And you'd be like, oh, that's a shame. I guess I'll just ask next door. you just collect wallets. As for the computer, I wouldn't rule out that Porter was the one behind the phone calls. While I don't personally think Porter's got anything to do with Ray's death, I do think he was a bit of a douchebag finance bro. Ray was supposed to be editing a video for Stansbury, a video that people had already paid for, and I don't think it's impossible that Porter wanted to get access to Ray's computer in the hopes that the editing was already done, or because Ray had the only copy of the footage. It's certainly weird, but is not necessarily nefarious. Then again, there's also a lot of speculation that Ray's note was nothing nefarious or even suspicious. It was certainly weird, bordering on the incomprehensible and delusional, but many have speculated that he could just been ideas for a new screenplay that Ray wanted to write. Oh, come on. That he tucks away behind his computer. Ray's lost his mind. There was a certain common theme among most of what was written, so I suppose it isn't impossible that Ray was brainstorming ideas for the next Fight Club or the game rather than experiencing delusions. I find it extremely unlikely, especially given the way the note was formatted, but I can't rule that out entirely. It's extremely, extremely unlikely. Of course, there is one detail about this case that often gets overlooked, and I think it's the main reason people want to believe that Ray's death was murder. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death undetermined, and that ruling was never officially changed, even if the police did rule it a probable suicide, separate from what the coroner said. However, this is actually a known problem in Maryland, and one that's existed for at least 20 years, if not longer. In the state of Maryland, nearly 25% of all deaths are ruled undetermined, even when the cause of death seems obvious. This is something that has drawn a lot of criticism as it leads to statewide underreporting of overdoses, homicides, and suicides. And despite over 20 years of news articles complaining about this problem, the state of Maryland has not changed its policies. Come on, Maryland, get your shit together. But hey, if a person dies alone in a room with a heroin needle in their arm, who's to say that they overdosed and that they weren't murdered via a forced injection? And if someone falls off a building when the cameras are mysteriously not working, who's to say they jumped rather than being pushed? There's no way for a medical examiner to know just by examining the body, so many of these deaths remain labelled as officially undetermined, even after the police are able to investigate and draw a reasonable conclusion. I feel a reasonable conclusion, you can just say, reasonable conclusion, like uncertain but, like unknown but. Unfortunately, while Ray's case will likely always be treated as an unsolved murder, all of the available information makes it seem like this was a tragic case of someone experiencing psychosis and ending his own life, possibly unintentionally, before his friends and family noticed enough of a change in his behavior to convince him to seek help. Then again, I'm drawing this conclusion based only on the available information. Who knows what information the Freemasons have colluded to help keep hidden from the public. Jeanette De Palma. I'd like to end today's episode with what may be the single strangest case I've ever written about. Holy saying something, considering today's. Like, the dude posed like the statues, what the Jeanette De Palma was born on August 3rd, 1956 in Jersey City, New Jersey. She was the daughter of Salvatore and Florence De Palma and came from a family of Italian Catholics, as evidenced by the fact that she was the 6th out of 8 children her parents had. Indeed. Jeanette spent her early life in Russell, New Jersey, but in the mid-1960s, her family moved to Springfield, New Jersey. My fellow millennials may want to cover their ears with this part, but Springfield was an upper-middle-class area, so the 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house in De Palma. Oh God, it set them back $65,000. Oh God. Although, to be fair, I know inflation is roughly at a zero from the 60s because of Mad Men, so it would be $650,000. Which I feel, I don't know, that probably wouldn't buy you a 5-bedroom, 4-bedroom bathroom house in, I don't know, is Springfield, it's a middle-class area, upper middle-class area. I don't think $650,000 would buy you a 5-bedroom house in an upper middle-class area anymore. I don't know about America, definitely not here, definitely not in the UK. Springfield had a great reputation as a clean and friendly community, but they weren't thrilled with their new neighbors. A lot of people had been moving to Springfield from Manhattan and Long Island, and the locals didn't take kindly to this influx of people who they felt were ruining the aesthetic of their community. Jeanette and her family may have been New Jersey natives rather than transplants from New York, but they were still disliked by the neighbors, all the same for invading the community. This community sounds like a bunch of dicks. It certainly didn't help that shortly after moving to Springfield, the De Palmas joined the Assemblies of God Evangelical Church. A mouthful, and began describing themselves as born-again evangelical Christians, the most annoying type of Christian. I got no problem with religion. I mean, I think it's a bit silly, personally, but if people want to be religious, fucking have at it. What I don't like is the evangelicals, where they're like, oh, have you considered becoming religious? My grandparents were pretty evangelical. It drove me mad. It's like, just stop. Just stop with the religious stories. No one cares. Neighbors looked down on them for this, and they began spreading rumors about the family. The most well-publicized rumor was that Salvatore was a boss in the Sicilian mafia, which is a weird thing to make up. I guess I can understand hating someone enough to spread lies about them, but I don't get why you would lie about the person having lots of money, power, and the ability to make their enemies simply disappear. Yeah, especially if you're not in the mafia. People just spreading rumors that you're in the mafia and you're just like, cool, I mean, I'm not doing any crimes, so there's no real risk there if people want to think I'm in the mafia. I mean, no one's going to with me. You just make like casual threats that are non-threats. Like, be shame if if something happened to you. Wouldn't it just? Like some mafia. Regardless, none of this really seemed to affect Jeanette's attitude, and she was described as just being a normal teenager. Sure, she was on the quiet side, but she was also a really kind person, a good friend, and even enjoyed going to parties once in a while. Of course, while Jeanette may have been a good friend, she didn't have a lot of friends. There was a group of girls she was really close with, so much so that she considered them sisters, but she didn't fit in with most people. It didn't help that her classmates spread nasty rumors about her, especially about her being promiscuous. I don't know or care whether or not that was true, though we do know she did date a couple of boys, which might be relevant later. Oh no! Although I guess it was the 60s, people look a bit, people were a bit more, what's the opposite of promiscuous? I don't know. On August the 7th, 1972, just 4 days after Jeanette's 16th birthday, she told her mother that she was going to hitchhike to the train station so she could go to her cousin's house. I know that sounds insane to us today, but back then hitchhiking was seen as a good way to get where you needed to go, so telling your mum you were going to hitchhike and would be back later just wasn't seen as strange. Anyway, Jeanette and her cousin Gail had met a couple of boys the night before at a party, and they planned to meet up again. Earlier that morning, Jeanette had called Gail to say that she couldn't come because she had to do chores around the house, but eventually Gail talked her into coming. It was a little before 1:30 p.m. when Jeanette left her house, but she never met up with her cousin. By 10 p.m. that night, Jeanette hadn't returned home, hadn't made it to Gail's, and nobody had heard from her since she left. At that point, her parents decided to call the police and report her missing. Excellent move. Unfortunately, they were met with the same excuse that has appeared in far too many crime stories. The police told Jeanette's parents they had to wait 24 hours before they could report her as missing. I feel like fine for an adult. Like if I went missing for 24 hours, my family would be extremely worried, because it's completely out of character. But I wouldn't expect the police to be particularly worried. They'd be like, oh, he's probably, I don't know, he just needs some space or something like that. I wouldn't expect them to be concerned. If I was a 16-year-old girl, I would. After all, she was a teenager. She probably just ran away or was secretly meeting some boy. I mean, that, to be honest. Salvador comes out and he's like, listen, I think you should be taking this a bit more seriously, police. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you. I think by now everybody knows that there has never been a law requiring this waiting period and that the first 24 hours are the most important in a missing persons case. But while there was no statute mandating a 24-hour wait, many police departments operated under this policy, especially in the 60s through 80s. The next day, Jeanette was finally declared missing, though it is claimed that police did very little to actually try and find her. Her parents went out searching, but they had no luck either. Why wouldn't you guys search for her? She's a missing 16-year-old girl. It's been 24 hours, police. What the f*** are you doing? While failure to find any trace of Jeanette could potentially leave a family with hope that their loved one was only kidnapped and might still be alive and able to be recovered, as the weeks dragged on, Florence resigned herself to the fact that her daughter was already dead. Now, on September the 19th, 6 weeks after Jeanette's disappearance, 46-year-old Grace Trezone was unpacking groceries from a trip to the store. It was just a regular day doing regular stuff, like letting her dog run into the woods at Hoodale Quarry that bordered her property. When the dog ran back out of the woods, Grace thought she was carrying a bone in its mouth. As the dog got closer, Grace realized that she was it's not a bone, it's a hand or something, or an arm. About the dog carrying a bone, but the bone was covered in decomposing human flesh. She immediately called the cops, who in turn called in bloodhounds to help them search the 120-acre quarry. Grace's dog had discovered a human forearm, and not long after the search began, one of the officers found the upper arm on a nearby dirt road. This helped them narrow down the area where the rest of the body would like to be, but it took another 6 hours before the police would discover anything else. Eventually, the search led them to a 40-foot-tall cliff known as Devil's Teeth. A couple of police officers climbed up to the top of the cliff where they found the rest of the body. For weeks, animals and insects had been feasting upon what was now a badly decomposed body, so it wasn't until they compared the remains against dental records that they were able to confirm that this was the body of Jeanette De Palma. Unfortunately, because Jeanette's body was so badly decomposed, they were unable to perform an autopsy. An X-ray of her skull was done, which ruled out traumatic injury, but there wasn't much else that could be determined. They claimed that the X-ray results meant it was unlikely that Jeanette had been stabbed or shot, though I don't know if you could really make that determination from only looking at her skull. I feel like you can make the determination, well, she wasn't shot in the head or stabbed in the head, but it's kind of hard to determine that. Using magic? Regardless, strangulation was identified as the suspected cause of death, even though there was no way to confirm this. As such, Jeanette's official cause of death is undetermined and her death was ruled as suspicious. Guys, no. Police did treat it as a probable homicide, but it was never officially declared to be one. Although police investigated the crime scene thoroughly, there wasn't much to find. There was a pair of brown sandals near Jeanette's feet, the ones that she'd been wearing when she left the house. This was determined as potentially suspicious because a lot of people think it would have been impossible for her to climb up to the top of the cliff in sandals. What, so someone carried her to the top of the cliff? Do you ever have that, where you're just like, you have one of those moments where you're like, oh, I just realized a dream I had last night that to me is super interesting, but no one's going to care about. I went hiking on the moon. Oh, that's so strange. She could theoretically have taken the sandals off and climbed up there barefoot, though many speculate she would have been incapable of scaling the cliff regardless of her footwear. Right, so, but how's someone going to carry her up there? Oh God, was she dropped from a helicopter or something? Was her dad actually in the mafia? Of course, that means the alternative would be that someone carried her body up there, which seems even less likely. Police had to call in a fire truck with an aerial ladder in order to remove her body from the scene, so I'm not sure how someone could carry a potentially unwilling party up the 40-foot cliff. Well, they could be unconscious, but still, that's really a challenge. Regardless, about 8 feet away from Jeanette's body were the contents of her purse. It was normal stuff like tissues, an inhaler, makeup, and makeup accessories, and a clear vial containing a mystery substance that has never been identified. Wait, why not? Just put it in one of those, spectral things. Spectrum analyzers? Broad spectrum analyzers? Isn't there a device that does that? Or is this just on CSI? Or if it has been, that information has never been released to the public. Florence believed the vial just contained some over-the-counter cold medicine, as she had been suffering from a mild cold the day that she disappeared, but people have some other theories on this. There was something very obviously missing from Jeanette's belongings, however. Police had found the dumped-out contents of her purse, but the actual purse was nowhere to be found. Jeanette also always wore a necklace with a cross on it, and that too was missing. Neither of the items have ever been located, but their absence certainly suggests that somebody stole them. But that was all the physical evidence that existed. Jeanette's clothes were tested for blood and semen, as there were stains on her shirt, pants, bra, and underwear. Nothing could be determined, though, because the samples were too decomposed by 1972 standards to yield any results. The underwear was also tested for hair, with no hairs being found except those belonging to Jeanette. This was taken as proof that she had not been sexually assaulted, which feels like a very strong claim to make based off that singular detail. I'm not saying that she was sexually assaulted, I just don't think there's enough evidence to definitively claim one way or the other. It seemed like a tragic murder, with no answers and no leads. But about 2 weeks after Jeanette's body was discovered, papers began reporting some unusual details about the crime scene. According to anonymous statements, allegedly from one of the officers who'd recovered Jeanette's body, she was found in the center of 4 logs arranged to form the shape of a trapezoidal coffin. Sticks had also been used to form crosses surrounding Jeanette's body. What is happening? This led to speculation that Jeanette had been the victim of a ritual sacrifice carried out by Satanists or a coven of witches. There were also claims that it looked like there had been animal sacrifices found alongside Jeanette's body as well. These rumors were amplified by James Tate, the evangelical pastor from the De Palma's church. It wasn't long before the entire county was gripped with fear over Satanists and witches. It certainly didn't help matters that this was just 10 months after New Jersey resident John List murdered his family. Oh, we've covered John List, haven't we? In part because of his religious fanaticism. And while there is no official evidence that this actually transpired, Tate went on to claim to newspaper reporters that the police took a witch to the location where Jeanette's body was found in the hopes that she could provide them with information. Surely not. I feel like that is something that is made up. I don't think the police would be like, oh, let's find a witch. The police be like, you know what, witches aren't real. Let's do some actual police work. Although it does seem they're a little bit opposed to that. There was only ever one person named as a person of interest in the case, a drifter known as Red Kira, presumably not his real name. Why not? People are called Red, aren't they? Isn't Red? Red? What's Red short for? I know there's that TV show Reddington, Raymond Reddington, he was called Red. But isn't Red like a abbreviation for a first name as well? A few months after Jeanette's body was found, newspapers reported that the police were searching for Red because they wanted to talk to him. Red was a roughly 46-year-old man who was living in Holdale Quarry at the time of Jeanette's disappearance. He had also reportedly left later that month before the body was found. However, this wasn't unusual for Red. He travelled around the country, mostly the southern states, working as a caddy at golf courses. Wherever he stayed, he would build himself a little shack or campsite, and when he got bored or wasn't able to find customers, he would break down his site and move on to the next city. I gotta say, I don't imagine Red smells particularly good. And if you're out, playing a little bit of golf, I don't want my caddy to smell terrible. Right? That August, he had been caddying for golfers at Bolt Ursrol Golf Club in Springfield, so his presence in town wasn't suspicious. Still, his campsite wasn't far from Devil's Teeth, so it was possible that he might have seen or heard something. Police did eventually locate and question Red, but he was released and allegedly never returned to New Jersey, even though police seemed satisfied that he wasn't the killer and had no useful information. Florence never bought into any of the occult nonsense, so after 10 years without answers, she hired a private investigator to look into the case. Unfortunately, the police refused to play ball, so any requests for documents or information were denied, but rumors continued to abound. In addition to the claims of satanic rituals and witchcraft, there was also the claim that Jeanette might have overdosed on drugs. What? And then took off her sandals and climbed up a cliff. What the According to the police, Devil's Teeth was known as a popular location for teens to party and do drugs. Wait, up on the cliff? That's really hard to climb up? I don't imagine the teenagers who are super into, smoking weed or whatever. Let's climb up the giant cliff and smoke weed on top of it. And just be like, or we could smoke weed at the bottom. It's possible that Jeanette overdosed, and fearing for their own asses, all of her supposed friends fled the area and left her to die. This led to speculation that the unidentified substance in the vial belonging to Jeanette might have been heroin or some other narcotic. Yeah, but they can obviously test for that. However, while Jeanette had experimented with drugs in the past, by this point she was said to have fully turned towards evangelism, seeking to bring others away from drugs and closer to God. Also, there's a massive difference in drugs. I don't know, I'm like pot. It's if my kids smoke pot, I'd be like, all right, fine, you do you. If they're doing heroin, I'd be like, guys, maybe you shouldn't be doing heroin. There's a big difference. With Florence's investigator unable to turn up any leads, the case went dormant again for years. It wasn't until the 90s that Jeanette's case really started to get a lot of attention. In 1989, friends Mark Moran and Mark Sherman began sending a newsletter to their friends titled Weird NJ. It was about creepy places, weird people, paranormal, and whatever other stories they could dig up to distract themselves and their friends from the disappointing reality of living in New Jersey. These guys would definitely be making a YouTube channel today, or a podcast of some flavor. The newspaper quickly became popular beyond just their circle of friends, and in 1992 it became a publicly available magazine published twice a year. And while it's annoying that they're both called Mark, from now on, Mark will specifically refer to Mark Moran, and as he and Weird NJ correspondent Jesse Pollock were the ones who literally wrote the book on the case, published in 2015, updated in 2022. In 1997, Weird NJ received a letter from a fan that mentioned Jeanette's death and the occult rumors surrounding it. The author of the letter didn't remember Jeanette's name, though, so the magazine wasn't able to corroborate the details of the story. Instead of writing their own article on Jeanette's death, they published the fan letter in the magazine. It's like OG user-generated content. This led to a deluge of letters from people sharing what they remembered about the case, including Jeanette's name, and all of those new bits of information inspired Mark to dig deeper. The only problem was that nobody wanted to talk about it. Sure, lots of people had written into the magazine with what they remembered, but when Mark and Jesse actually visited the area, people seemed afraid to talk about the case. It was decades later, yet residents still seemed not only to believe the murder was occult in nature, but that evil occult forces might do something horrible to them if they spoke about it. Right, yeah, that sounds real. Things were going slowly, but in 2002, there was a major win for civilian investigators. At least, there should have been. New Jersey passed the Open Public Records Act. The Freedom of Information Act was passed by the US back in the 1960s. Holy shit. I didn't realize it was that old. I thought kind of freedom of information was a relatively recent thing. But that only applied to federal documents. Each state had their own records laws, and New Jersey's previous Right to Know Act was pretty restrictive. The OPRA was much closer to fire in scope, and this allowed Mark and Jesse to request police records on the case. Unfortunately, according to the police, all the documents and evidence from Jeanette's case had been conveniently destroyed by Hurricane Floyd in 1999. I mean, that does feel like they were just destroyed by a hurricane. It's not like, oh, they mysteriously disappeared. Oh, they were caught in an extremely localized fire. It's like, no, big-ass hurricane came and destroyed all that. But this battle was long from over. Mark, Jesse, and Jeanette's nephew Ray continued to fight for the documents, turning their attention toward the county prosecutor's office. Their requests kept getting denied, but in 2019, the former director of communications for the prosecutor's office helped them submit the kind of detailed requests that couldn't be refused. These days, you'll be like, ChatGPT, write me something that they cannot refuse. Find all of the little legal things that make them have to do this. ChatGPT is an incredible paralegal. And except when it makes stuff. You just send that letter, it's like, I demand this to be released under Section 6, subsection 14 of the Freedom of Information Act. And they're like, there is no Section 6. It doesn't exist. They could be delayed by nearly 2 years because of COVID, but in 2021, the prosecutor's office finally released all the documents from Jeanette's case file. This included the crime scene photos, and they told a very different story from what the police and media had said back in 1972. Jeanette's body is fortunately cut out of this, but here's one of the crime scene photos to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Okay? It just looks like there's a blacked out body, which I appreciate, seemingly in the woods. I don't see any weird coffin things or crucifixes or anything like that. If you're listening to this, yeah, I'm doing you a favor. If you're watching, you're probably like, Simon, I can see the picture, but this also goes out as a podcast, so you're welcome, podcast listeners. As you can see, there isn't anything remotely resembling a coffin made of logs. There's one log that's much bigger than all the other brush on the ground, but Jeanette's body was very much not surrounded on all four sides. Also, maybe some of those branches on the ground form crosses, but if so, that would be the result of random chance and the fact that there's 1,000 branches everywhere. Despite all of the rumors and reporting that allegedly originated with the police, absolutely nothing from the crime scene resembled any sort of occult symbol or iconography. There was no evidence of animal sacrifice. In fact, there wasn't evidence of anything at all taking place on Top Devil's Teeth. The area was far more overgrown than anyone expected, which was a bit weird. While the claims of witchcraft are only alleged to have originated with police, the police explicitly claimed that this was a popular spot for teens to party. So where were the beer bottles, cigarette butts, or literally any sign that this was a place that would frequent human traffic? Well, maybe the teenagers of New Jersey are just extremely environmentally conscious in the 1970s. They're clearing up their beer bottles. They're putting their cigarette butts in their pockets or something. In retrospect, it probably should have been obvious that this was a lie. Devil's Teeth was supposed to be a well-known spot for partying and drugs, yet nobody found Jeanette's body until 6 weeks later. Jeanette disappeared with a full month of summer vacation left, so there was still plenty of time for teenagers to party, and it's not like the entire city was going to simultaneously give up drugs all at the same time by sheer coincidence. But even though everyone seemed to miss the logical inconsistency with the official story, there was now proof that the police were lying about Jeanette's case, and there was no occult involvement in her murder. And this raised another very obvious question. Yes, why did the police lie? Was it the police that were lying, or was it that random dude who claimed to the newspapers or whatever? I don't have an answer for you, but there sure are some wild theories. In 2004, Weird NJ did an interview with Jeanette's nephew, John. It's pretty cool that this random newspaper, that Weird NJ, that became a magazine from just some kids messing around, actually lasted and was still a thing in 2004. So Jeanette's nephew, John, she was one of 8 kids, so had a lot of nephews. For the record, John was only 4 years old back in 1971, so it's not like he would have a lot of first-hand information from the time of Jeanette's death. That said, John claimed to know exactly who murdered Jeanette, the chief of police's son. Bruh. According to the rumors John had heard, and admitted he had no way to prove, the chief of police's son really had a thing for Jeanette. Unfortunately for him, she was already dating someone else, since he couldn't go out with her and said he killed her. Makes no sense. Why wouldn't you kill the guy? If you're gonna kill someone, what are you doing? And then he felt so guilty about it, he killed himself. While it would certainly explain a motive for the police to cover up the details of Jeanette's death, there's nothing to substantiate this. There aren't any names involved, and I can't find any reports of the son or of a New Jersey police chief killing himself during that time period. This just sounds like an urban legend, just something that's completely made up. Another similar rumor that began circulating online is that Wayne Tate, the son of Pastor James Tate, may have been responsible. Wayne and Jeanette had dated for 2 or 3 months, with Jeanette ending their relationship about a week before her disappearance. And while I say they dated, or rather Wayne says they dated, they never actually saw each other outside of church functions. Sounds like Wayne's living in a dream world. Wayne was interviewed as part of a Hulu show about Jeanette's murder, and viewers of the show immediately latched on to either him or his father as the murderer. Personally, I didn't get this impression from the brief clips they showed of Wayne, but a lot of people believe that he came off as someone obsessed, like he still wasn't over his short relationship with Jeanette despite it being 50 years later. Yeah, that is weird though, dude. It's like, get over it, man. It's half a century later, bruh. Were that the case that he killed Jeanette for breaking up with him, it would certainly explain his father's actions. James had pushed the occult angle really hard in a way that could certainly be seen as trying to obfuscate the truth. There was allegedly a copy of the Satanic Bible found in Jeanette's room after her death, and the book was allegedly found by none other than Pastor James while he was visiting the family to console them. Mighty convenient there, Jimbo. Of course, an alternative explanation for James's actions would be that he was just exploiting Jeanette's death to sow fear and bring people to his congregation. While Simon's lawyers informed me that I would personally never make such a claim, there are a lot of people who are of the opinion that the Assemblies of God is a full-on cult, and that they were way more culty back in the 1970s and 80s. Yeah, we would never say that. Some people say that. Some people have that opinion. Not us. We're just citing other people's opinions that exist. I couldn't possibly speak to the veracity of such claims, but it would be very on brand for a cult to exploit the tragic death of a young girl for their own gains, especially if that girl was a member of their church. Another claim is that Jeanette wasn't murdered, she was accidentally killed by the police. Ooh, okay. Hoodale Quarry was more than just a rock quarry and a place for homeless drifters to camp out. It was also home to a police shooting range. There's speculation that Jeanette may have been shot by an officer using the range and her body was hidden afterwards. This probably makes the least sense of all the theories, though. Yes, because if that happened, you'd just be like, oh my God, like, it wasn't intentional, it was an accident. She was walking on a shooting range. There's gonna be signs. Sure, you could argue this would explain why the police would lie about what the crime scene looked like and then try to keep those documents buried despite public requests to release them, but they could have also just told the truth. If this happened, people obviously wouldn't have been thrilled to learn that Jeanette was accidentally killed by a police officer, but they'd also understand that people shouldn't walk through or behind an active gun range. It just wouldn't make sense to lie about it. Exactly. Kevin and I, same page. Also, why would Jeanette have been there in the first place? We know she was hitchhiking to the train to go and meet her cousin, to go and hang out with some boys. So why would she have been walking alone through the quarry? I understand how the proximity of the police shooting range to the location of Jeanette's body makes this theory appealing. I mean, but no, in my opinion, no. Especially since the police lied about the scene of the crime, but this feels like a bit of a stretch. There was potential break-in the case in 2021 when Jesse Pollack from Weird NJ received a letter from a man named Richard Cottingham, a letter that seemed to be claiming that he was responsible for kidnapping and killing Jeanette. If you're unfamiliar with that name, I am. Richard Cottingham is better known as the Torso Killer, a man convicted of murdering a dozen women in New Jersey during this time period, as well as another 3 convictions in New York. He's suspected of being responsible for even more deaths as well. According to some reports, Richard provided information that lines up with Jeanette's death and that hadn't been released to the public. I don't know what information that would be, though, since there's barely anything on this case that seems like it. Since there's barely anything on this case, and it seems like what little exists was finally made public in 2021 before Jesse interviewed Richard. That said, the police have never indicated that Richard was being considered a suspect, and most people who followed the case have dismissed him as a possibility. The Torso Killer got his name because many of his murders contained brutal acts of mutilation, something that almost certainly would have taken place if it killed Jeanette in such an isolated location. Also, the location was so isolated that it is believed that the killer had to be somebody local with intimate knowledge of the area, and something that Richard would not have had. It has been 54 years since Jeanette's murder, and we're still no closer to the truth. I mean, we're a little closer because we can say with certainty that she was not killed as part of a satanic ritual, but that was a ridiculous theory anyway. We do know that the police lied about the nature of Devil's Teeth, though, and they spent half a century trying to hide their official records from the public. Maybe it was just to hide their general incompetence, yeah, I would say, and the bungling of the investigation, or maybe there was a more sinister motive at play. I think they're just embarrassed. they did a really bad job and they were like, I just want people to move on, please. No, we're not releasing the files, thank you. However, there are a few people that believe they know who killed Jeanette with absolute certainty. I mentioned her nephew John earlier, and he, along with actress Holly Zwell and special effects artist Edward Solzano, founded the organization Justice for Jeanette De Palma. According to the organization's website, we know who did it, and there's potential DNA evidence, so her body must be exhumed. I have no idea if they have correctly identified the killer or not, but their current main objective is definitely the correct one. Jeanette's death certificate lists deferred pending further study as the cause of death, and her death is officially still considered suspicious. They are fighting to get this officially changed to homicide, as the suspicious death classification has created bureaucratic and legal hurdles that have severely hindered much of the progress that could be made in the case. Sorry, but it's homicide, guys. Like, come on now. As for who they believe the killer is, that's none of your business. They state multiple times on their website that they know who killed Jeanette and can prove it with DNA evidence, but they don't actually say who their suspect is. Alright, that's a bit weird. Admittedly, that's probably the correct move, it's just frustrating not to have a name. Wait, why not? Just go to the police with it. If they're right, though, it may only be a matter of time before Jeanette's murder is finally solved. It seems like the only thing standing between us and the truth behind her murder is the police department. On the bright side, because it's been so long since Jeanette's murder, everybody who worked for the police department back then must be close to death by now. Eventually, she would be 70, right? Eventually, all the people who are either ashamed of the poor job they did or are trying to cover something up will be gone, and the case will finally be able to move forward. Of course, the downside of that is by the time this case is solved, the killer may already be long dead as well, so they will never face justice. Wow, yeah, that's fair. I think they're probably already dead. Oh, that's the episode. A long one. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it. Thank you for listening all the way through. Brilliant stuff. And I'll see you next time.